I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I never should have taken the night shift at Redwood Storage. But when you're fresh out of college, with a mountain of debt and no prospects, you don't exactly have the luxury of being picky. So there I was, pulling up to the sprawling warehouse complex at 11:45 p.m., fumbling with my new set of keys in the dark. The company orientation video had made it seem simple enough. 8 hours of wandering around a mostly empty building, making sure nothing was on fire and no one was breaking in. Easy money, right, wrong. So wrong. My first night started off quiet enough. I did my rounds, clipboard in hand, checking off boxes as I went. The only sounds were the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of my footsteps on concrete. It was almost peaceful, in a way. Then, around 2 a.m., I saw it. Just a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just rows and rows of shelves stretching into the shadows. Get it together, Mike, I muttered to myself. It's a warehouse. Things settle. It's fine. I shook it off and kept walking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Like the air had gotten a little thicker, a little colder. By the time my shift ended at 8 a.m., I was convinced I was just being paranoid. New job jitters, that's all. I clocked out, drove home, and crashed into bed without another thought. Night 2 started much the same. I settled into the tiny security office, screens flickering to life as I logged into the system. The warehouse looked just as still and empty as the night before, until it didn't. Around 1 a.m., I was doing my usual walkthrough when I saw it again. This time, I was sure. A box, way up on one of the top shelves, slowly sliding forward. I froze, breath catching in my throat. There was no way that box should be moving on its own. I approached cautiously, flashlight beam dancing across the shelves. When I reached the aisle in question, I shone the light upwards. The box was perfectly in place, hadn't moved an inch. "Okay," I said aloud, voice echoing in the empty space. "Okay, you're seeing things, Mike. Time for some coffee." I hurried back to the office, hands shaking slightly as I poured myself a cup. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. By the third night, I was on edge before I even clocked in. I found myself jumping at every little noise, eyes darting to the shadows. But nothing happened. Hours ticked by, and I started to relax. Maybe I really had imagined it all. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., all hell broke loose. I was watching the security feeds when movement caught my eye. On screen after screen, objects were shifting. Boxes sliding, pallets tipping, doors swinging open and closed. "No," I whispered, leaning in close to the monitors. "No, no, no." I grabbed my flashlight and radio, bursting out of the office at a run. I had to see it for myself. Had to know I wasn't going crazy. The main floor was chaos. Everywhere I looked, things were moving. A forklift inched forward without a driver. Loose papers swirled in a non-existent breeze. And in the distance, I swear I heard laughter. "This isn't real," I said, voice shaking. "This can't be real." I sprinted back to the office, slamming the door behind me. My hands trembled as I rewound the security footage. I had to have proof. had to show someone what was happening. But when I played back the tapes, my blood ran cold. The screens showed nothing but an empty, silent warehouse. No movement, no chaos, nothing. I sat there, staring at the monitors, for the rest of my shift. By the time morning came, I was a wreck. I thought about quitting right then and there, but I needed this job, and a part of me needed to know what was really going on. The next few nights were quiet, too quiet. I found myself almost wishing for something to happen, just so I'd know I wasn't losing my mind. I started talking to myself, just to break the silence. "Come on," I'd mutter, pacing the empty aisles. "I know you're here. Show yourself." But nothing did. The warehouse remained stubbornly, maddeningly still. It wasn't until my 10th night that things changed again. I was doing my usual rounds when I noticed something odd about one of the storage units. The padlock, which I distinctly remembered checking earlier, was now hanging open. Heart pounding, I approached the unit. The metal door creaked as I slid it up, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just stacks of boxes and old furniture. Then my light fell on something that made my blood run cold. A chair placed in the center of the unit, facing the door, as if someone had been sitting there, waiting for me. I slammed the door shut, breathing hard. This was too much, too real. I had to tell someone. I practically ran to the office, fumbling for my phone. But as I went to dial my supervisor's number, I hesitated. What exactly was I going to say? That I was seeing things move on their own? That I'd found a creepy chair? I could already imagine how that conversation would go. Best case scenario, they'd think I was nuts. Worst case, I'd be fired on the spot. No, I realized. I had to handle this myself. Had to find proof. So I came up with a plan. The next night, I brought in a small camera. Nothing fancy, just an old digital point-and-shoot. I set it up in the office, aimed at the main floor. If anything happened, I'd have evidence. For hours, nothing did. I was starting to think I'd wasted my time when, around 4 a.m., I heard it. A soft scraping sound coming from somewhere in the warehouse. Heartbeat thundering in my ears, I crept out of the office. The sound was coming from aisle E, a long row of industrial shelving packed with electronics. As I rounded the corner, flashlight beam wobbling, I saw it. A large flat-screen TV, slowly sliding off the edge of a shelf. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as the TV inched forward. There was no way it should be moving like that. No way. Just as it was about to tip over, I snapped out of my daze. I lunged forward, catching the TV just before it hit the ground. "Got you," I gasped, arms straining under the weight. What the hell is going on here? As if in answer, I felt something brush against the back of my neck. A cold whisper of air, carrying what sounded like a child's laughter. I whirled around, heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just empty air and long shadows. Shaking, I managed to get the TV back on the shelf. Then I ran, full tilt, back to the office. I grabbed the camera, frantically scrolling through the footage, and there it was, clear as day. The TV moving on its own, sliding off the shelf, me catching it. And then, I froze the image, zooming in. There, just visible in the corner of the frame, was a shape, blurry and indistinct, but unmistakably there. A figure, small and dark, darting out of view. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." I sat there, staring at that image, until my shift ended. As I drove home in the grey light of dawn, my mind raced. What had I gotten myself into? What was I going to do? I spent the day in a daze, jumping at every noise, seeing movement in every shadow. By the time I had to head back to work, I was a nervous wreck. But I went because I had to know, had to understand what was happening in that warehouse. That night, my 11th on the job, everything changed. It started normally enough. I did my rounds, checked the cameras, tried to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Around midnight, I heard it. A soft tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. It was coming from the office window. I turned, slowly, dreading what I might see. But there was nothing there. Just my own pale reflection staring back at me. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. And as I watched, words began to appear on the glass, as if an invisible hand was writing in condensation that wasn't there. "Join us," it spelled out. "Join the experiment." I stumbled back, knocking over my chair. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. But even as I thought it, I knew that everything, the moving objects, the laughter, the blurry figure, it had all been leading to this moment. I wasn't just a night watchman, I was a subject, and the experiment wasn't over yet. As that realization washed over me, the lights in the office flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard movement, all around me, getting closer. And then, just before everything went black, I heard a voice, soft and childlike, but with an undercurrent of something ancient and hungry. "Welcome," it said. "We've been waiting for you." I never left the warehouse that night. Sometimes, in my more lucid moments, I wonder if I ever will. But most of the time, I'm too busy watching, waiting for the next night watchman to start their shift. Story 2. The neon sign flickered in the darkness, a beacon of hope on this godforsaken stretch of highway. Maggie's Diner. Open 24/7. It proclaimed in buzzing red letters. My stomach growled, reminding me it had been hours since my last meal. I pulled into the nearly full parking lot, wondering how a place so remote could be this busy at 2 a.m. Little did I know I was about to have the longest meal of my life. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside, the warm air hitting me like a wall after hours in my cold car. The scent of coffee and grilled onions filled my nostrils, making my mouth water instantly. Classic rock played softly from unseen speakers, barely audible above the clinking of silverware and murmur of conversation. I slid into an empty booth, the cracked final seat squeaking beneath me. A laminated menu sat waiting, its corners curled and yellowed with age. As I perused the offerings, a waitress appeared at my table, coffee pot in hand. "Coffee, hun?" she asked, her voice raspy from years of cigarettes. I nodded, watching as she filled my mug with steaming black liquid. "Thanks. Busy night, huh?" The waitress, Doris, according to her name tag, glanced around the packed diner. "Oh, you know how it is. Night owls and long-haul truckers." She winked, pulling out a notepad. "What can I get you?" I ordered a cheeseburger and fries, then settled back to people watch as I waited. The diner was an eclectic mix of folks. An old man in overalls hunched over the counter, nursing a mug of coffee. A group of teenagers laughed in a corner booth, their plates piled high with half-eaten pancakes. A woman in a business suit tapped away on her laptop, a forgotten salad wilting beside her. But as I observed more closely, something felt off. The laughter from the teenagers sounded hollow, almost rehearsed. The businessman hadn't turned a page in the newspaper he was supposedly reading for at least 10 minutes. And despite the fullness of their plates, I couldn't actually see anyone eating. I shook my head, chalking it up to road fatigue. I'd been driving for nearly 12 hours straight. After all, my imagination was probably just working overtime. Doris returned with my food, the plate landing on the table with a soft thud. "Enjoy, sugar," she said, already turning to walk away. "Thanks," I called after her. "Oh, and could I get some ketchup?" She paused, turning back slowly. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Confusion, fear, but then it was gone, replaced by that same plastic smile. "Sure thing, hun. Be right back." I watched her go, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. Something about her movements seemed mechanical, like a wind-up toy running on its last bit of energy. Pushing the thought aside, I picked up my burger and took a big bite. It was fine. Not great, not terrible. Just absolutely middle-of-the-road diner food. But as I chewed, I realized the taste was fading, like my taste buds were going numb. I reached for my coffee, hoping to wash away the strange sensation. The mug was still full, steam rising from its surface, despite having sat untouched for at least 15 minutes. That's when I noticed the silence. The music had stopped. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation. All of it gone. I looked up, my blood running cold at what I saw. Every single person in the diner was staring at me. Not just glancing, not stealing looks between bites of food. Full-on, unblinking stares. Dozens of eyes, all fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I laughed nervously, the sound dying in my throat. Do I have something on my face?" No one responded. No one moved. They just kept staring. Heart pounding, I stood up. "Okay, well, I think I'm gonna hit the road. Thanks for the meal." I fumbled in my pocket for my wallet, tossing a 20 on the table. As I turned to leave, I found Doris blocking my path, that same empty smile plastered on her face. "Leaving so soon, hun?" she asked, her voice eerily cheerful. "But you haven't finished your meal. We insist you stay." I tried to step around her, but she moved with me, always staying between me and the door. "Really? I'm good. I need to get going." Now, she said, reaching out to pat my arm. Her hand was ice cold. "Why don't you sit back down? Relax. Stay a while." The tension in the air was suffocating. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, hear the sound of chairs scraping as people stood up. They were all moving towards me, slowly but steadily, that same vacant expression on every face. Panic rising in my throat, I shoved past Doris and ran for the door. I hit it at full speed, expecting it to fly open. It didn't budge. I rattled the handle, pushed, pulled, nothing. It was like trying to open a solid wall. Through the glass, I could see my car sitting in the parking lot, so close yet impossibly far away. "Now look what you've done." Doris's voice came from behind me, dripping with disappointment. "You've upset the others. We don't like when our guests try to leave early." I spun around, pressing my back against the door. The entire diner had emptied, forming a semicircle around me. Their faces were changing, features melting and shifting like wax under a flame. What are you?" I managed to choke out. Doris tilted her head, her neck extending at an impossible angle. "We are the keepers of this place, the guardians of the in-between. And you, my dear, are our newest guest." I closed my eyes, praying this was all some sort of nightmare. When I opened them, I found myself back in the booth, my burger sitting untouched before me. For a moment, relief washed over me. It had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much caffeine. But then I saw the clock on the wall. 2:05 a.m. the exact time I'd arrived. "No," I whispered, looking around frantically. Everything was as it had been when I first walked in. The old man at the counter, the teenagers in the corner, the woman with her laptop, all staring at me, all smiling, those empty smiles. Doris appeared at my table, coffee pot in hand. "More coffee, hun?" she asked, already pouring. I watched in horror as the dark liquid filled my mug, steam rising despite the fact that I knew I had already drunk from it. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place?" Doris's smile widened, her teeth too sharp, too numerous. "Oh, sweetie, you're home now, and home is where you stay." The bell above the door chimed. I turned, hope flaring in my chest at the thought of rescue. A man walked in, road-weary and hungry-looking, just as I had been, just as we all had been. He slid into a booth, oblivious to the eyes following his every move. Doris winked at me, then moved to greet him, coffee pot at the ready. "Welcome to Maggie's," I heard her rasp. "Coffee, hun." As the scene played out before me, a perfect mirror of my own arrival, I felt something inside me change. The fear didn't fade, not exactly, but it was joined by something else. A hunger, a need. I found myself standing, moving towards the new arrival. My smile felt wrong on my face, too wide, too fixed. But I couldn't stop it. "Hey, there," I heard myself say, my voice distant and unfamiliar. "Long night on the road, huh? Why don't you relax? Stay a while." The man looked up at me, confusion and unease flickering across his face. But then Doris was there, her hand on his shoulder, guiding him back into his seat. "That's right, sugar," she cooed. "You're with family now." As the night stretched on, endless and unchanging, I understood the truth. We were all trapped here, in this liminal space between what was and what could be. Doris, the old man, the teenagers. We were all just players in this eternal performance, doomed to repeat the same scene over and over. And now, so was I. Sometimes, in quiet moments between new arrivals, I think I hear something. A whisper, a plea, coming from that endless hallway behind the diner's door. But then the bell chimes, and a new guest arrives, and the hunger takes over once more. So if you're ever driving down a lonely stretch of highway in the dead of night, and you see a neon sign flickering in the darkness, promising hot food and fresh coffee, keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how hungry, just keep going. Because at Maggie's Diner, the meal never ends. And neither does the night. Story 3. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds chirping, no leaves rustling, not even the crunch of our boots on the forest floor. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. I should have known then that we'd made a terrible mistake, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name's Alex, and I've been hiking with my best friend, Sam, since we were kids. We thought we knew these mountains like the backs of our hands. Turns out, we didn't know jack. It was supposed to be a routine weekend trip. We'd done this trail a dozen times before, or so we thought. The trailhead looked the same as always. Weathered wooden sign, gravel parking lot, dense forest stretching as far as the eye could see. But about an hour in, something felt off. "Hey, Sam," I called out, pausing to take a swig from my water bottle. "Does this part of the trail look familiar to you?" Sam stopped a few paces ahead, frowning as he scanned our surroundings. The trees here seemed older, their trunks wider and more gnarled than I remembered. Moss hung from the branches in thick curtains, giving the whole scene an eerie, primordial feel. "Not really," he admitted, pulling out his phone. "Let me check the map." I watched as his frown deepened, fingers tapping furiously at the screen. "That's weird. No signal." A tendril of unease curled in my gut. Maybe we took a wrong turn. Sam shook his head. "Nah, we've been following the blazes the whole time. See?" He pointed to a faded blue mark on a nearby tree. I squinted at it. The paint looked old, almost completely worn away. How had we never noticed these before? "I guess," I said, not entirely convinced. "Should we head back?" Sam glanced at his watch. "We've already come this far. Might as well keep going, right? Could be a cool new part of the trail we've never seen before." I hesitated, that uneasy feeling growing stronger. But Sam was already moving forward, his excitement palpable. With a sigh, I followed. As we pressed on, the forest seemed to grow denser, the light dimming despite it being barely past noon. The air felt thicker too, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. "You hear that?" Sam asked suddenly, stopping in his tracks. I listened intently. At first, all I could hear was the sound of our own breathing. But then, just at the edge of hearing, I caught it. A whisper, so faint it could have been the wind. Except there was no wind. "Probably just some hikers up ahead," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Sam nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. We pressed on in silence, both straining to catch that elusive sound again. It was maybe an hour later when we stumbled upon the clearing. A perfect circle of grass amid the dense forest, unmarred by fallen leaves or branches. At its center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk easily wider than both of us combined. "Whoa," Sam breathed, stepping into the clearing. "This is incredible. How have we never found this before?" I hung back, that feeling of wrongness intensifying. Something about this place felt alive, aware, like we were trespassers in someone else's home. "Sam," I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the strange silence. Maybe we shouldn't, but he was already at the base of the great oak, running his hand over its gnarled bark. "Alex, you gotta feel this. It's warm." Reluctantly, I stepped into the clearing. The moment my foot touched the grass, a shiver ran through me. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin like an invisible fog. I reached the tree, placing my palm against its trunk. Sam was right. It was warm, pulsing gently like a giant wooden heart. That's when we heard it again, the whisper. Only this time, it wasn't just one voice, but many. A chorus of hushed tones, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sam's eyes widened. "You hear that, right?" "I'm not going crazy." I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent. And now, out of the corner of my eye, I could see movement in the trees surrounding the clearing. Dark shapes, flitting between the trunks too fast to focus on. "We need to go," I managed to croak out. "Now." For once, Sam didn't argue. We turned to leave, only to find our path blocked by a wall of mist that hadn't been there moments before. "What the hell?" Sam muttered, reaching out to touch it. His hand passed through, but when he pulled it back, his fingers were coated in a fine, green powder. The whispers crescendoed, and suddenly I could make out words. "Stay," they seemed to say. "Join us. Become one with the forest." Panic seized me. I grabbed Sam's arm, pulling him towards where I thought the trail should be. "Run!" We plunged into the mist, branches whipping at our faces as we crashed through the underbrush. I had no idea if we were going the right way, but anything was better than that clearing. We ran until our lungs burned, the whispers always just behind us, urging us to stop, to turn back, to give in. When we finally paused to catch our breath, I realized with growing horror that nothing looked familiar. The trees here were even older, their trunks twisted into impossible shapes. Thick vines hung everywhere, seeming to writhe and reach for us when we weren't looking directly at them. "Alex," Sam panted, his face pale with fear. "I think we're lost." Lost was an understatement. We were somewhere else entirely, somewhere that shouldn't exist. As night began to fall, we tried to retrace our steps, but it was useless. Every path led back to the same place. That damn clearing with its too perfect grass and massive oak. We made camp reluctantly, neither of us willing to admit that we were trapped. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the constant whispers and the sensation of being watched. I awoke just before dawn to find Sam gone, his sleeping bag empty beside me. Panic clawed at my throat as I called his name, my voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around to see Sam emerging from the trees, a strange, serene smile on his face. "Sam," I asked cautiously, "you okay, buddy?" He tilted his head, regarding me with eyes that seemed too green, too bright. "Never better, Alex. I understand now. The forest, it's alive. It wants us to stay, to become part of it." As he spoke, I noticed fine tendrils of moss creeping up his arms, burrowing under his skin. His hair had taken on a greenish tint, leaves and twigs tangled in the strands. "Sam, listen to me," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "This isn't you. We need to get out of here now." He shook his head, still smiling that unsettling smile. "But why would we want to leave? Everything we need is right here. Food, shelter, eternal life. The forest provides." As if on cue, a low branch dipped down, offering a cluster of plump, purple berries. Sam plucked one, popping it into his mouth with a contented sigh. "Join us, Alex," he said, holding out his hand. The skin had taken on a bark-like texture, rough and brown, become one with the forest. "It's beautiful here." Single quotes for a moment, I was tempted. The whispers surged, painting visions of eternal peace, of becoming something greater than myself. But then I saw the Sam I knew, my best friend since childhood, disappearing behind those two bright eyes. "No," I whispered, then louder. "No, this isn't real. Sam, fight it." I lunged forward, grabbing his shoulders. For an instant, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Then pain exploded in my abdomen as something sharp pierced my skin. I looked down to see a vine protruding from Sam's chest, its thorny end buried in my stomach. As I staggered back, more vines erupted from the ground, wrapping around my legs. "I'm sorry, Alex," Sam said, his voice distorting, becoming one with the whispers. "But the forest must grow, and you will help it grow." I fought, struggled, but it was useless. The vines pulled me down, into the earth that suddenly seemed as soft and welcoming as a bed. As darkness closed in, I saw Sam, or what used to be Sam, meld with the trunk of a nearby tree, his features smoothing into bark. The last thing I heard before consciousness faded was the triumphant chorus of whispers. "Welcome home," they said. "Welcome to the eternal forest." I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't work the same in this place. Sometimes I think I'm still me, still Alex. Other times I'm a tree, a vine, a cluster of mushrooms sprouting from rotting wood. But always, Always, I'm aware, watching, waiting for the next lost hiker to stumble upon our hidden trail. So if you're ever hiking in the mountains and come across a path that seems just a little too perfect, a little too inviting, turn back, because the forest is always hungry, and it's always growing. Story 4. The first time I noticed something was off about my new apartment was when I found my coffee mug in the sink. The thing is, I hadn't used it yet. I'd just unpacked it that morning, setting it on the counter next to the coffee maker. But there it was, sitting in the sink, a faint brown ring inside, as if someone had just finished a cup. I chalked it up to moving stress and too little sleep. After all, the last few days had been a whirlwind of boxes, paperwork, and trying to remember where I'd packed my toothbrush. But as the days went on, the odd occurrences kept piling up, each one chipping away at my sanity bit by bit. It started small. A book I swore I'd left on the nightstand would be back on the shelf. The TV remote would migrate from the coffee table to the kitchen counter. My jacket, hung neatly by the door, would end up draped over a chair. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was more absent-minded than I thought. Maybe the stress of the move and starting a new job was getting to me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A week after moving in, I decided to introduce myself to my neighbors. Maybe they could shed some light on the building's quirks. I knocked on the door across the hall, plastering on my friendliest smile when an elderly woman answered. "Hi there. I'm Emma. I just moved in across the way," I said, gesturing to my door. I thought I'd say hello to my new neighbors. The woman's brow furrowed, her eyes darting between me and my apartment door. "Moved in? But dear, that apartment's been empty for years." My smile faltered. "I'm sorry. What?" "No, I just signed the lease last week. I've been living there for days now." She shook her head, a look of concern crossing her weathered features. "I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. No one's lived in that unit since. Well, since the incident." A chill ran down my spine. "Incident? What incident?" But the woman was already closing her door, muttering something about needing her medication. I stood there in the hallway, my mind reeling. What the hell was going on? I spent the rest of the day knocking on doors, but the response was always the same. No one believed anyone had moved into the apartment. Some looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. One guy even threatened to call the cops if I didn't stop playing pranks. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every shadow had me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I cornered my landlord as he was checking the mail. "Mr. Rosen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you about my apartment." He looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Your apartment? I'm sorry, who were you?" My stomach dropped. "Emma Patterson. I moved into 4B last week. You gave me the keys yourself." Mr. Rosen's face paled. That's not possible. 4B has been vacant for years. We don't even show it to prospective tenants anymore. But I'm living there," I practically shouted, fumbling in my pocket for the keys. "Look, see? You gave me these." I held out the keys, but Mr. Rosen just stared at my empty hand. "Miss, I think you should see a doctor. There's nothing there." I looked down, and to my horror, he was right. My hand was empty. But I'd felt the keys. I'd seen them. I ran back to my apartment, slamming the door behind me. This couldn't be happening. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. As I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, something caught my eye. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I turned slowly, my heart's pounding in my chest. There, In the full-length mirror hanging on my closet door was my reflection. But something was wrong. The me in the mirror was smiling, a cold, empty smile that sent shivers down my spine. I blinked, and the image was gone. Just my own terrified face staring back at me. That's when I noticed the smell. A faint, musty odor that seemed to be coming from my closet. With shaking hands, I approached the door, steeling myself for whatever I might find. I pulled it open, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. Just my clothes hanging neatly, shoes lined up on the floor. But then I saw it. A small door set into the back wall of the closet. A door that definitely hadn't been there before. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, to run and never look back. But a morbid curiosity took hold. I had to know what was behind that door. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the doorknob. It turned easily, the door swinging open with a soft creak. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was my apartment. An exact mirror image, down to the last detail. But everything was wrong. The colors were muted, as if seen through a thin layer of dust. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay. And there, sitting on the couch, was me. Or rather, something wearing my face. It turned to look at me, its eyes black and empty. When it smiled, I saw rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "Welcome home," it said, its voice a rasping parody of my own. "We've been waiting for you." I slammed the door shut, stumbling backward out of the closet. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. I spent the next few hours huddled in the corner of my bedroom, jumping at every sound, every shadow. As night fell, the apartment seemed to come alive. Whispers echoed from the walls, too faint to make out words but unmistakably there. Objects moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. And always, I could feel eyes on me. When dawn finally broke, I made a decision. I had to get out of there, reality be damned. I grabbed my phone, ready to call a cab, a friend, anyone who could pick me up. But when I tried to unlock it, the screen remained black. I pressed the power button again and again, growing more frantic with each attempt. Nothing. In desperation, I ran to the door, yanking it open. But instead of the hallway, I found myself staring at a brick wall. I slammed the door shut, then opened it again. Brick again. Brick. Panic clawed at my throat as I ran from room to room, trying every door, every window. All led to the same thing. Solid brick, trapping me inside. As I stood there, my mind struggling to process what was happening, I heard a sound behind me. A door opening. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. The closet door stood open, and beyond it, the small door to the mirror apartment swung gently on its hinges. "No," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But even as I said it, I could feel the wrongness of the apartment pressing in on me. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. The whispers in the walls grew louder, more insistent. And there, reflected in every surface, the TV screen, the windows, the mirror, was that other me, watching, waiting. I don't know how long I've been here now. Time doesn't seem to work right in this place. Sometimes I think I hear voices from the other side of the walls. My neighbors, going about their lives, unaware of the nightmare playing out just feet away. I've tried everything to escape, to wake up from this nightmare. But the doors always lead back here. The windows always show the same view, no matter what floor I should be on. And always, there's that other me, watching from the mirrors, from the reflections in the TV screen, from the dark corners of the room, smiling that too wide smile, eyes black and hungry. Sometimes, in my weaker moments, I find myself drawn to that small door in the back of the closet. Part of me wonders if maybe, just maybe, it might lead somewhere else this time. Somewhere normal, somewhere safe. But deep down, I know the truth. There is no escape, no way out. Because this apartment, this twisted reflection of reality, it's not just a place. It's alive, and it's hungry. So if you're ever apartment hunting, and you find a place that seems too good to be true, perfect location, great price, available immediately, be careful. Look closely at the reflections in the mirrors. Check for doors that shouldn't be there. And whatever you do, don't sign the lease. Because once you're in, you might never get out. And trust me, you don't want to meet your new neighbor. Story 5. The first time I noted something was off about my new commute was when my favorite song ended halfway through. I'd taken this route 100 times before, and I knew exactly how long it took. 23 minutes on a good day, 30 if traffic was bad. Just enough time for 5 songs on my carefully curated playlist. But today, as I emerged from the tunnel, Bohemian Rhapsody cut off right before the guitar solo. Weird, but not impossible. Traffic must have been lighter than usual. If only I'd known then what I know now. Maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe I could have saved myself. But hindsight's 20/20ths, right? And in the moment, all I cared about was getting to work on time. My name's Jack, and this is the story of how my morning commute turned into a nightmare. It started innocently enough. A new job meant a new route to work, and I was actually kind of excited about it. The Mountain Pass Tunnel was a feat of engineering, cutting straight through the heart of the mountain range that had always made this commute a pain. Now, instead of winding mountain roads, I had a straight shot into the city. The tunnel itself was impressive. A long, smooth tube of concrete and steel, lit by rows of amber lights that gave everything an otherworldly glow. As I entered it that first morning, I felt a little thrill of excitement. This was going to shave at least 20 minutes off my commute each way. But as the days went by, little things started to nag at me. That weird time discrepancy with my music, for one. It kept happening, songs cutting off earlier and earlier in my playlist. And then there was the radio. No matter what station I tuned to, it would always dissolve into static about halfway through the tunnel. Damn mountains, I muttered to myself one morning, fiddling with the dial, messing with the signal. But it wasn't just the radio. My phone would lose service too, the bars dropping away one by one until I was left with nothing but a no service message glaring at me from the screen. I mentioned it to my coworker, Lisa, over coffee one day. "Oh yeah," she said, stirring her latte absently. "The dead zone. Everyone knows about that." I frowned. "The dead zone." She nodded, leaning in conspiratorially. "That's what they call it. Supposedly, there's a stretch in the middle of the tunnel where nothing works. No radio, no cell service, nothing. Some people say it's because of the mountain, but others..." She trailed off, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Others, what?" I prompted, more curious than I wanted to admit. Lisa grinned. "Others say it's haunted. That the tunnel was built over an old mining town, and the ghosts don't like us passing through their home." I rolled my eyes. "Come on, Lisa. Ghost stories." "Really?" She shrugged, leaning back in her chair. "Hey, I'm just telling you what I've heard. But haven't you noticed anything weird in there?" I thought about the music cutting off, the endless static on the radio. But no, that was all explainable, wasn't it? "Nah," I said, forcing a laugh. "It's just a tunnel." But Lisa's words stuck with me. The next morning, as I approached the tunnel entrance, I found myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. The amber lights seemed dimmer somehow, casting long shadows that danced across my windshield. As I passed the halfway point, right on cue, my radio dissolved into static. But this time, beneath the white noise, I could have sworn I heard something, a voice, maybe. Words I couldn't quite make out. I shook my head, reaching to turn off the radio. As my hand touched the dial, a cold shiver ran down my spine. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw something in my rearview mirror. A face, pale and gaunt, staring at me from the back seat. I whipped my head around, heart pounding, but the back seat was empty. Just my imagination playing tricks on me. Had to be. The next few days, I found myself dreading my morning commute. Each time I entered the tunnel, the oppressive darkness seemed to press in closer. The lights flickered more, their amber glow taking on a sickly hue. And always, that feeling of being watched. It was a week later when things really went off the rails. I was about halfway through the tunnel when my car started to sputter. No, I muttered, easing off the gas. Not here, not now, but it was no use. The engine coughed once, twice, and then died completely. I coasted to a stop, the silence suddenly deafening. I sat there for a moment, heart racing. The tunnel stretched out before and behind me, the amber lights casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I reached for my phone, already knowing what I'd see. No service. "Okay, Jack," I said aloud, trying to calm myself. "It's fine. Someone will come along soon. Just gotta wait it out." But as the minutes ticked by, no one came. No cars, no maintenance vehicles, nothing. Just me in the endless, echoing silence of the tunnel. That's when I noticed the smell. At first, it was faint, a musty, earthy scent that reminded me of old basements and forgotten places. But it grew stronger, filling the car with the stench of decay. And then I heard it. A soft tapping coming from somewhere behind me. Tap, 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 like fingernails on glass. I froze, not daring to breathe. Slowly, so slowly, I turned to look in the back seat. There was nothing there. But as I watched, breath caught in my throat. A handprint appeared on the window. A child's hand, small and delicate, pressing against the glass from the outside. I screamed, fumbling with my seatbelt. I had to get out, had to run. But as I reached for the door handle, I caught a glimpse of my rearview mirror. The tunnel behind me was gone. In its place was a vast, cavernous space, dotted with the crumbling remains of old buildings. And walking towards my car, their movements jerky and unnatural, were figures, dozens of them. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothes from another era. All with skin as pale as death and eyes that glowed in the darkness. I blinked, and the vision was gone. Just the tunnel again, stretching out behind me. But now I could hear them. Whispers, growing louder with each passing second. Fragments of conversations, cries of pain, the sounds of a town long dead, but somehow still alive. My engine roared to life, making me jump. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas, tires squealing as I shot forward. The whispers rose to a crescendo, drowning out even the sound of my racing heart. I burst out of the tunnel into the bright morning sunlight, gasping for air. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. I pulled over at the first chance I got, collapsing against the steering wheel. It took me a long time to calm down enough to drive the rest of the way to work. When I finally arrived, over an hour late, Lisa took one look at my pale face and sat me down. "It happened to you, didn't it?" she asked softly. "You saw them?" I nodded, unable to speak. She sighed, patting my hand gently. "The tunnel, it does things to people, shows them things. Most folks, they only get a glimpse. But sometimes," she trailed off, her eyes distant, "sometimes it decides it wants to keep you." I shuddered, remembering the pale faces, the ghostly handprint. "What do I do?" Lisa's expression hardened. "You find another way to work, Jack, no matter how long it takes. Because if you go back in there..." She shook her head. "Well, let's just say not everyone comes back out. I quit my job that day. Couldn't face the thought of driving through that tunnel ever again. Some nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of those whispers ringing in my ears. So if you're ever driving through a mountain tunnel and your radio starts to static out, your phone loses service, don't stop. Don't look in the rearview mirror. Just keep driving as fast as you can until you see daylight. Because in the darkness of the mountain pass tunnel, something is waiting, watching, and it's hungry for new souls to add to its ghostly town." Story 6. The first call came at 2:37 a.m. I remember because I'd just glanced at my alarm clock, cursing my restless mind for keeping me awake. When my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up the darkness of my bedroom, I figured it was a wrong number. Who else would be calling at this ungodly hour? I let it go to voicemail, turning over in bed and willing sleep to come. But then it buzzed again. And again. By the fourth call, a gnawing unease had settled in my stomach. I reached for the phone, squinting at the bright screen. Unknown number. With a sigh, I answered. "Hello." Static filled my ear, a harsh, grating sound that made me wince. But beneath it, barely audible, I heard something else. Whispers, faint, unintelligible, but definitely there. "Hello," I repeated, louder this time. "Who is this?" The whispers grew more frantic, almost desperate. I strained to make out words, but it was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. Just as I was about to hang up, a single word cut through the static, clear as day. "Sarah." My blood ran cold. That was my name. My finger hovered over the end call button, but before I could press it, the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding. It had to be a prank, right? Some kids messing around with a voice changer. But deep down, I knew. This was something else. Something wrong. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I tossed and turned, jumping at every creak of the house, settling every rustle of wind outside my window. When my alarm finally went off at 7, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. As I stumbled through my morning routine, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a weird coincidence. But the memory of those whispers, the way my name had cut through the static, kept replaying in my mind. I mentioned it to my roommate, Jess, over breakfast. "Weird prank calls," she said around a mouthful of toast. "Welcome to the joys of having your number leaked online. Probably some creep with too much time on his hands." I nodded, wanting to believe her. But something about her explanation felt off. "Yeah, probably," I muttered, pushing my untouched cereal around the bowl. The day passed in a haze of exhaustion and paranoia. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting to see that unknown number again. But it was always just work emails, texts from friends, the usual daily noise. By the time I crawled into bed that night, I'd almost convinced myself it was all in my head. Almost. The call came at 2:37 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the first one. This time, I answered immediately. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my attempt at bravery. The static was there again, but fainter. The whispers, on the other hand, were louder, clearer. I could almost make out words. "Sarah. Danger. Coming." "What danger?" I asked, my knuckles white around the phone. "Who's coming?" But the voice faded, drowned out by a surge of static. And then, silence. I didn't sleep at all that night, or the next. Each night, at exactly 2:37 a.m., the calls came. Each time, the whispers grew clearer, more urgent, but never quite clear enough to understand fully. By the fifth night, I was a wreck. Dark circles ringed my eyes. My hands shook constantly, and I jumped at the slightest sound. Jess was starting to worry, I could tell. But how could I explain? How could I tell her that every night, ghostly voices were warning me of some unnamed danger? "Sarah," she said over dinner, her voice gentle but firm, "you need help. These calls, whatever they are, they're messing with your head. Maybe we should call the police, or get your number changed." I shook my head vehemently. "No, I need to know what they're trying to tell me. It's important, Jess. I can feel it." She sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Okay, but promise me, if it gets worse, you'll let me help." I nodded, guilt gnawing at me. I hated lying to her, but how could I explain the growing certainty that these calls were more than just harassment? That they were trying to warn me of something real? That night, I sat up in bed, waiting for 2:37 a.m. When my phone buzzed, I answered before the first ring had even finished. "I'm here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please, tell me what's going on." The static was almost gone now. The whispers had solidified into a single voice. Female, young, terrified. "Sarah," it said, the word clear as a bell. "You need to run. It's found you. It's coming." "What's coming?" I asked, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Who are you?" "No time," the voice said, growing fainter. "Look outside. The symbols. They're already here." The line went dead. For a moment, I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. Then, moving as if in a dream, I went to my window. At first, I saw nothing. Just the quiet street, bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw it. On the sidewalk directly across from my house, barely visible in the dim light, was a symbol. A crude circle with a jagged line through it, drawn in what looked horribly like blood. My breath caught in my throat. It hadn't been there yesterday. I was sure of it. As I stared, movement caught my eye. A figure, tall and unnaturally thin, gliding out of the shadows at the end of the street. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, its head twitching from side to side as if scenting the air. I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew. This was what the voices had been warning me about. I threw on clothes with shaking hands, shoving essentials into a backpack. As I passed Jess's room, I hesitated. Should I wake her? Try to explain. But one glance out the window showed the figure getting closer, its movements becoming more frenzied as it neared my house. There was no time. I scribbled a hasty note, had to leave, I'm sorry. Stay safe," and left it on the kitchen counter. Then, taking a deep breath, I slipped out the back door into the cool night air. I ran, through backyards, down alleys, my lungs burning and legs aching. But no matter how far or fast I went, I could feel it behind me. Always just out of sight, but there, hunting, hungry. As dawn broke, I found myself at the bus station, staring at the departures board with bleary eyes. A bus was leaving for the next state over in 10 minutes. Without hesitation, I bought a ticket. As I settled into my seat, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. With trembling fingers, I answered. "You're safer now," the voice said, clearer than ever before. "But it won't stop. It will never stop. Keep running, Sarah. And whatever you do, don't look back." The line went dead for the final time. As the bus pulled out of the station, I looked out the window. There, in the growing light of day, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the parking lot, its form twisted and wrong in ways my mind couldn't quite process. As I watched, it raised a hand. Too long, too many joints, and waved. I turned away, squeezing my eyes shut. When I looked again, it was gone, but I could still feel its presence, like a cold weight pressing down on me. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it's after me. All I know is that I can't stop running, can't stop moving. Because if I do, if I let my guard down for even a moment, it will find me. And then, I fear, the whispers will finally stop. Not because the danger has passed, but because there will be no one left to warn. So if your phone rings in the dead of night, and you hear whispers on the other end of the line, listen carefully. They might just be trying to save your life. And whatever you do, don't look back, because something might be gaining on you. Story 7. The moment we rolled into Millbrook, I knew something was off. The town looked like it had been plucked straight out of a 1950s postcard. All quaint storefronts and perfectly manicured lawns. But there was an eerie stillness to it all, like the whole place was holding its breath. "Honey, are you sure this is the right turn?" I asked my wife, Lisa, as we coasted down Main Street. She frowned, squinting at her phone. "GPS says so." "Strange. I'm not getting any bars here." I glanced at my own phone. No signal. "Great. Well, we need gas anyway," I said, pulling into a vintage-looking service station. "Maybe we can ask for directions." As I stepped out of the car, the silence hit me like a wall. No birds chirping, no distant traffic, not even the hum of electricity. Just nothing. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door to the station's shop. Behind the counter stood an older man, his face as weathered as old leather. "Afternoon," he drawled, not looking up from his newspaper. "What can I do for you folks?" "Hi there," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "We're a bit lost. Trying to get to Lakeside Resort." The man slowly lowered his paper, fixing me with a stare that made my skin crawl. "Lakeside, you say? That's a fair ways from here. You'll want to head back the way you came, take the fork at Miller's Creek." I nodded, eager to be on our way. "Great, thanks. Oh, and can we fill up? Tank's running a bit low." He shook his head. "Sorry, son. Pumps are dry. Waiting on a delivery." I frowned. All of them. The man just stared at me, his eyes unblinking. "Right," I muttered. "Well, thanks anyway." As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A calendar on the wall, yellowed with age. It showed July 1952. Back in the car, I relayed the conversation to Lisa. "Maybe we should just head back," I suggested. "Find somewhere else to stay tonight." She sighed. We've been driving for hours, Dave. Let's at least grab a bite to eat before we go. Reluctantly, I agreed. We found a diner a few blocks down, its neon open sign flickering weakly in the fading daylight. The inside was like stepping into a time capsule. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, waitresses in poodle skirts. But something was off. The colors seemed muted, somehow. And the few patrons scattered around weren't eating. They just sat, staring into space, forks poised halfway to their mouths. A waitress approached, her smile too wide, too fixed. "Welcome to Rosie's. What can I get you folks?" We ordered burgers and shakes, more out of politeness than hunger. As we waited, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced around, the other patrons were in the exact same positions. Not a muscle had moved. "Lisa," I whispered, leaning across the table. "Something's not right here. These people, they're not moving." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, Dave. They're just quiet." But I could see the unease in her eyes. She felt it too. Our food arrived, looking picture perfect, but utterly unappetizing. The burger was cold to the touch, the shake more like slightly melted plastic than ice cream. "I think we should go," I said, pushing my plate away. Lisa nodded, her face pale. "Yeah, let's." As we stood to leave, the diner fell silent. The soft music that had been playing cut off abruptly. Every head turned to stare at us, movements jerky and unnatural. "Leaving so soon?" the waitress asked, her smile now a grotesque rictus. "But you've barely touched your food." We bolted the bell over the door, jangling discordantly as we burst out onto the street. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us with grasping fingers. "The car," Lisa gasped. "We need to get to the car." But as we rounded the corner, my heart sank. The service station where we'd parked was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. "This isn't possible," I muttered, spinning around. Nothing looked familiar anymore. The quaint storefronts had morphed into dilapidated ruins, windows dark and empty. "Dave," Lisa's voice shook. "Look." I followed her gaze to the end of the street. A crowd was forming, people shuffling out of buildings and alleyways. Their movements were wrung to fluid in some places, to jerky in others. And their faces. God, their faces were blurring, features running like wax under a flame. "Run," I whispered, grabbing Lisa's hand. "Run." We tore down the street, the sound of shuffling feet growing louder behind us. I chanced to glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The crowd had grown, a sea of distorted faces and reaching arms. There, Lisa pointed to a building at the end of the block. The town hall. We sprinted up the steps, yanking on the heavy wooden doors. For a heart-stopping moment, they didn't budge. Then, with a groan, they swung open. We slammed them shut behind us, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. Moonlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating rows of benches and a raised dais at the far end. "What the hell is going on?" Lisa panted, clutching my arm. Before I could answer, a voice rang out, echoing off the high ceiling. "Welcome, travelers. We've been expecting you." An old man stood on the dais, his suit outdated but immaculate. Unlike the others, his face was clear, kind even. But his eyes were ancient, filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "What is this place?" The man smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "This is Millbrook, a special place for special people. People like you." "We're nothing special," Lisa said, her voice shaking. We're just lost. We want to go home." The old man's smile widened. "Oh, but you are special. You see, Millbrook needs new blood, fresh souls to keep it alive." As he spoke, the air around him seemed to shimmer. For a moment, I saw through the illusion. The grand town hall dissolved, revealing a vast, cavern-like space. The benches were really rows of stone slabs, each holding a motionless body. "You're not real," I gasped. "None of this is real." The old man laughed, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "Oh, we're real enough. We've been here for centuries, drawing in lost souls, feeding off their essence. And now, it's your turn to join us." The doors behind us burst open. The crowd from outside poured in, their forms shifting and melting together into a writhing mass of limbs and faces. "Lisa, run!" I shouted, pushing her towards a side door I'd spotted. We ran through winding corridors, the walls seeming to pulse and breathe around us. Behind us, I could hear the old man's laughter, growing louder with each turn. "You can't escape," his voice echoed. "Millbrook always gets what it wants." We burst out of the building, finding ourselves back on Main Street. But now, the edges of the town were blurring, buildings fading into a thick, swirling mist. "The car," Lisa gasped. "We have to find the car." We ran, the mist nipping at our heels. Streets twisted and changed, leading us in circles. Just when I thought we were done for, I saw it. Our car, sitting in the middle of an intersection that hadn't been there before. We dove in, the engine roaring to life as soon as I turned the key. I slammed on the gas, tires squealing as we shot forward. The mist closed in, tendrils reaching for us. In the rearview mirror, I saw the old man standing in the middle of the road, his form growing, distorting into something monstrous. "Don't look back," I told Lisa, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Whatever happens, don't look back." We hit the mist at full speed. For a moment, everything went dark. I felt a pulling sensation, like something was trying to drag us back. Then, suddenly, we burst through. The road stretched out before us, normal and blessedly empty. Behind us, there was nothing but open country. No town, no mist, no monsters. We drove in silence for hours, neither of us willing to stop until the sun began to rise. Finally, at a truck stop hundreds of miles away, we pulled over. "Was it real?" Lisa asked, her voice small. "Did that really happen?" I looked at her, saw the haunted look in her eyes that I knew mirrored my own. "I don't know," I admitted. "But let's agree on one thing." "What's that?" "Next time we go on a road trip, we stick to the main highways." She laughed, a sound tinged with hysteria but real, alive. As we pulled back onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd escaped something ancient and hungry, something that wasn't done with us yet. So if you're ever driving late at night and come across a town that seems too perfect, too quiet, keep driving, and whatever you do, don't look back. Because Millbrook is always hungry for new souls, and its reach might be farther than you think. Story 8. The day we moved into our new house on Willow Lane, my daughter Lily said the trees were watching us. I laughed it off, chalking it up to a 5-year-old's overactive imagination. But as I tucked her into bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was off. "Daddy," Lily whispered, her big brown eyes wide in the glow of her nightlight. "The trees are closer now. They don't like us here." I smoothed her hair, forcing a smile. "Sweetie, trees can't move. They're just trees. Now get some sleep, okay? Big day tomorrow." As I closed her door, I heard her mutter, "They can move." You just don't see it. I shook my head, heading downstairs where my wife, Sarah, was unpacking boxes in the living room. Lily's still going on about the watching trees. She asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. I nodded, flopping onto the couch. Yeah, weird, right? I mean, I get that moving can be scary for kids, but talking trees? Sarah shrugged, placing a framed photo on the mantel. She'll get over it. This place is a dream come true, Tom. Let's not let a little kid's fantasy ruin it for us. She was right, of course. This house was everything we'd ever wanted. Spacious, in a great school district, and surrounded by nature. The dense forest that bordered our property had been a major selling point. Now, though, as I glanced out the window at the dark mass of trees, I felt a shiver run down my spine. That night, I dreamed of roots breaking through our bedroom floor, of branches scratching at the windows, of leaves whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand but filled me with dread. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized something was wrong. The room seemed smaller. Trying not to wake Sarah, I crept to the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. The tree line, which yesterday had been a good 50 yards from the house, now stood barely 30 feet away. Impossible. Trees couldn't move. It had to be a trick of the light, or my mind playing tricks on me after that nightmare. I crawled back into bed, pulling the covers tight around me. Just my imagination. Had to be. The next morning, over coffee, I casually asked Sarah, "Hey, does the forest look closer to you?" She glanced out the kitchen window, brow furrowed. No, looks the same to me." "Why?" I shook my head, forcing a laugh. "No reason. Just my eyes playing tricks on me, I guess." But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Each morning, the trees seemed a little closer, the shadows they cast a little longer. Lily became more withdrawn, spending hours staring out her bedroom window, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. A week after we moved in, I woke in the middle of the night to find Lily standing at the foot of our bed. "Jesus, Lily," I gasped, sitting up. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Her face was pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide and unfocused. "They're coming, Daddy. The trees are hungry." Before I could respond, she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps eerily silent on the hardwood floor. I followed her, my heart pounding. She led me to her room, where she climbed back into bed without a word. As I tucked her in, my eyes were drawn to the window. The trees were there, pressed right up against the glass. Their branches swayed gently, despite there being no wind. I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. This couldn't be real. Trees didn't move. They couldn't. But as I watched, a branch scraped against the window, leaving a long, deep scratch in the glass. I ran back to our bedroom, shaking Sarah awake. "We have to go," I said, my voice trembling. "Now, pack a bag. We're leaving." Sarah sat up, confusion and concern warring on her face. "Tom, what's going on?" "It's the middle of the night." "The trees?" I said, knowing how insane I sounded. They're alive. They're trying to get in." She opened her mouth to argue, but then we heard it. A low, groaning sound, like wood bending under immense pressure. The walls seemed to flex inward, paint cracking as unseen roots pushed through the foundation. Sarah's eyes widened in terror. "Oh my God," she whispered. We grabbed Lily and ran, not bothering to pack anything. As we burst out the front door, I saw that the entire house was surrounded. Trees pressed in from all sides, their branches intertwining to form a living cage. There was a gap, though, a narrow path leading to the street. We ran for it, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass echoing behind us. Just as we reached the sidewalk, I felt something wrap around my ankle. I looked down to see a root, thick as my arm, pulling me back. "Go!" I shouted to Sarah, who had Lily in her arms. "Get to the car!" I kicked at the root, feeling it tighten with each movement. More tendrils snaked towards me, wrapping around my legs, my waist. Sarah hesitated, torn between helping me and protecting our daughter. "Tom, go," I repeated, struggling against the botanical onslaught. "I'll be right behind you." She ran, Lily's terrified cries fading as they reached the car. I fought with everything I had, ripping roots from my body, ignoring the pain as thorns dug into my skin. With a final, desperate lunge, I broke free. I sprinted to the car, diving into the passenger seat as Sarah gunned the engine. We tore down the street, the trees reaching for us, their branches scraping the sides of the car. In the rearview mirror, I watched as our house disappeared, swallowed by a writhing mass of green. We drove for hours, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky and we were several states away. At a dingy motel off the highway, we finally allowed ourselves to breathe. "What? What was that?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. I shook my head, at a loss for words. I don't know, but Lily was right. The trees, they were alive, watching us, hunting us. Lily, who had been silent since our escape, spoke up from the back seat. "They're not done, Daddy. They'll find us again." A chill ran down my spine at her words, because deep down, I knew she was right. In the days that followed, we tried to piece our lives back together. We found a new place to live, in the heart of a bustling city, far from any forests. But the fear never left us. Every time I see a tree, I can't help but wonder, is it watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike? And on quiet nights, when the wind rustles through leaves outside our window, I swear I can hear whispers, hungry whispers, promising that one day they'll finish what they started. So if you're ever house hunting and you come across a beautiful property bordering a forest, think twice, because sometimes the trees aren't content to just watch. Sometimes they want more, and once they've marked you as their prey, nowhere is truly safe. Story 9. The first time I noticed my reflection move on its own, I thought I was losing my mind. It was just a small thing, a blink when my eyes were open, a twitch of the lips when I was stone-faced. But as the days went by, the discrepancies grew, and so did my terror. My name is Maya, and this is the story of how my reflection tried to replace me. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just pulled an all-nighter finishing a project for work, and I looked like absolute hell. Dark circles under my eyes, hair a mess, skin pallid and lifeless. I stumbled into the bathroom, flicking on the harsh fluorescent light, and winced at my reflection. "Jesus, Maya," I muttered, leaning in close to the mirror. "You look like death warmed over." And that's when it happened. Just for a second, a fraction of a moment, I could have sworn my reflection smiled. Not the tired grimace I was wearing, but a real, wide smile. I blinked, and it was gone. I chalked it up to exhaustion and too much caffeine. Splashed some water on my face, got ready for work, and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. That smile, so out of place on my haggard face, kept creeping back into my thoughts. By the time I got home that evening, I was a bundle of nerves. I avoided the bathroom mirror, using the one in my bedroom instead. But as I was brushing my teeth, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, toothbrush still in my mouth, and froze. My reflection in the full-length mirror on my closet door was standing perfectly still, toothbrush nowhere in sight. As I watched, paralyzed, it slowly raised a finger to its lips in a shushing motion. I screamed, toothpaste foam flying everywhere. I blinked, and my reflection was normal again, mirroring my terrified expression. "Get it together, Maya," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "You're just tired. It's not real." But deep down, I knew. Something was very, very wrong. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I covered every reflective surface in my apartment. Mirrors, windows, even the glossy screen of my TV. At work, I kept my head down, avoiding the mirrored walls of the elevator and the shiny surface of my computer screen when it was turned off. My coworker, Jake, noticed something was off. "Hey, Maya," he said, concern etched on his face. "You okay? You seem jumpy." I forced a smile, knowing it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah, just not sleeping well. Stress, you know." He nodded, though I could tell he didn't quite believe me. "Well, if you need to talk." I cut him off. "Thanks, Jake. I'm fine, really." But I wasn't fine. Not even close. It was a week after that first incident when things really went off the rails. I was working late, alone in the office. As I was packing up to leave, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. Only, it wasn't packing up. It was sitting at my desk, typing away. I whirled around, heart pounding, but my desk was empty. When I looked back at the window, my reflection was normal again. That's when I decided I needed help. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Reeves was kind, patient, and utterly useless. "What you're experiencing sounds like a form of depersonalization," she said, her voice calm and professional. "It's not uncommon in high-stress situations. Your mind is creating a disconnect between your sense of self and your physical body." I wanted to scream. This wasn't some psychological break. This was real. My reflection was alive, and it was trying to, what? Replace me, torment me. But I nodded, took the prescription she offered, and left. The pills sat untouched on my nightstand. I knew they wouldn't help. Things escalated quickly after that. My reflection became bolder, moving more freely when I looked at it. Sometimes it would wave at me, or mouth words I couldn't understand. Other times, it would just stare, a hungry look in its eyes that made my skin crawl. I started sleeping with the lights on, too afraid of what I might see in the darkness of my bedroom mirror. But even that wasn't enough. One night, I woke to the sound of tapping. Tap, 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 like fingernails on glass. I opened my eyes, and there it was. My reflection, standing at the foot of my bed, pressed up against the inside of the mirror. Tapping, smiling. I screamed, scrambling out of bed and out of the room. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, lights blazing, jumping at every sound. The next day at work, I was a wreck. Jake took one look at me and dragged me into an empty conference room. "Okay, Spill," he said, his voice a mix of concern and frustration. "What the hell is going on with you, Maya?" And so, against my better judgment, I told him. Everything. The moving reflections, the tapping, the growing fear that I was losing my grip on reality. To his credit, Jake listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "I believe you." I blinked, tears of relief stinging my eyes. "You do?" He nodded. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I know you, Maya. You're not the type to make this stuff up. So if you say it's happening, it's happening. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe, with Jake's help, I could figure this out. We spent the next few days researching. Jake came over to my apartment, helping me document every incident, no matter how small. We set up cameras, hoping to catch something on film. But the reflection was clever. Whenever Jake was around, it behaved perfectly normally. It was only when I was alone that it acted out. We need to force its hand, Jake said one evening, poring over our notes. Make it show itself. I shuddered at the thought. How? He looked up at me, his expression grim. We need to trap it. Single quotes, the plan was simple, in theory. We'd cover every reflective surface in my apartment, except for one, the full-length mirror in my bedroom. Then, we'd wait. That night, as I lay in bed, every nerve on edge, I heard it. Tap, tap. I turned, slowly, to face the mirror. There I was, but not me. My reflection stood, pressing its hands against the glass, that hungry smile stretching its face. Jake, I whispered, my voice trembling. It's here. He burst into the room, camera in hand. But the moment he entered, my reflection snapped back to normal. Damn it, Jake growled, lowering the camera. We were so close. I sat up, my heart pounding. It knows. It's toying with us. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. There has to be a way, he cut off abruptly, his eyes widening as he stared at something behind me. I turned, following his gaze to the mirror. My reflection was gone. In its place was nothing, just an empty room. Maya, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't move. But it was too late. I felt it before I saw it. A cold hand on my shoulder, fingers digging in with inhuman strength. I screamed as I was yanked backward, toward the mirror. Jake lunged for me, his fingers just brushing mine before I was pulled through. It felt like plunging into ice-cold water. For a moment, everything was dark, silent. Then I was on the other side, in a world that looked just like mine, but wrong. Colors were muted, sounds muffled. And there, wearing my face, was my reflection. Thank you, it said, its voice a twisted echo of my own. I've been waiting so long for this. I watched in horror as it stepped through the mirror into my world, into my life. No, I screamed, pounding on the glass. But it was solid now, unyielding. The last thing I saw was Jake's confused face as my reflection took my place, smiling that hungry smile. Now I'm here, trapped in this mirror world, watching as that thing lives my life, fools my friends, takes everything that was mine. But I'm not giving up. I'll find a way back. And when I do, well, let's just say it's not the only one who's hungry. So the next time you look in a mirror and your reflection seems a little off, a little too slow to match your movements, don't ignore it. Don't blink. Because in that split second, everything can change. And you might find yourself on the wrong side of the glass, watching as your life is stolen right before your eyes. Story 10. The first time I heard the whispers, I was elbow-deep in Mrs. Abernathy's prize petunias. It was a scorching July afternoon, the kind where the air shimmers above the pavement and sweat beads on your upper lip before you've even moved a muscle. I'd been at this house for 3 hours already, yanking weeds and cursing my life choices, when a voice drifted through the open window above me. It's almost time, it said, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I froze, trowel hovering over a particularly stubborn dandelion. Mrs. Abernathy lived alone. Her husband had passed 2 winters ago, and her kids were all grown and gone. She shouldn't be home for hours yet. "Hello," I called out, squinting up at the window. No response. Just the lazy buzz of cicadas and the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street. I shook my head, chuckling at my own jumpiness. The heat was getting to me, that's all. I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. That night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again. A whisper right next to my ear. Soon, I bolted upright, heart pounding. My tiny studio apartment was empty, shadows stretching long in the pale moonlight filtering through the blinds. I flicked on the bedside lamp, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the corners. But there was nothing. Just my usual mess of dirty laundry and unopened bills. "Get it together, Charlie," I muttered, running a hand through my sweat-damp hair. "You're losing it." Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind outside my window had me on edge. By the time my alarm blared at 6 a.m., I was a jittery mess of caffeine and paranoia. I stumbled through my morning routine, downing 3 cups of coffee in a vain attempt to feel human. As I was brushing my teeth, I caught movement in the mirror out of the corner of my eye. I whirled around, toothbrush clenched in my fist like a weapon, but the bathroom was empty. When I turned back to the sink, I nearly choked on my toothpaste. There, scrawled in the steam on the mirror, were 2 words. "It's time." I scrambled backwards, slipping on the damp tile and landing hard on my ass. By the time I'd pulled myself up, the message was gone, the mirror clear and unremarkable. "Nope," I said aloud, my voice shaky. "Nope, nope, nope. Not doing this today." I called in sick to work, ignoring my boss's exasperated sigh. I knew I was on thin ice. 3 years of landscaping gigs, and I was still barely making ends meet. But I couldn't face going out there. Not with whatever this was going on. I spent the day huddled on my couch, binging mindless TV shows and jumping at every sound. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my apartment, a new noise cut through the canned laughter of the sitcom I wasn't really watching. Scritch, 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 like something scratching at the walls. Inside the walls, I muted the TV, straining to listen. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" The scratching stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, a whisper, so close it could have been inside my own head. "We're here, Charlie. We've always been here." I ran, out of my apartment, down the 3 flights of stairs, and into the muggy evening air. I didn't stop until I reached the park 2 blocks away, collapsing onto a bench, lungs burning. As my breathing slowed, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was I going crazy? Had I somehow ingested something? Or was this real? A jogger passed by, giving me a concerned look. I must have been quite a sight. Wild-eyed, in ratty sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, barefoot on a public bench. "You okay, man?" he asked, slowing to a stop. I opened my mouth to respond, to pour out everything that had been happening, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain this without sounding completely insane? "Yeah," I managed. "Just rough day, you know." He nodded sympathetically. "Been there. Hang in there, buddy." As he jogged away, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my apartment. Not tonight, maybe not ever. I needed help. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. Most were work-related. Clients, suppliers, my perpetually disappointed boss. But there, near the bottom, was a name I hadn't thought about in years. Dr. Evelyn Reed. She'd been my therapist back in high school, after my parents' messy divorce had sent me into a tailspin of depression and anxiety. I hadn't seen her in almost a decade, but, well, desperate times and all that. To my surprise, she answered on the second ring. Dr. Reed speaking. Dr. Reed, it's Charlie. Charlie Matheson. I don't know if you remember me, but Charlie. Her voice softened with recognition. Of course I remember you. Is everything all right? I laughed, a strangled sound that was closer to a sob. No, everything is very much not all right. I think I'm losing my mind. There was a pause, and for a moment I was sure she was going to hang up. But then she spoke, her voice calm and steady. Where are you right now, Charlie? Oakwood Park, on a bench near the fountain. Okay, stay there. I'm coming to get you. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in Dr. Reed's office, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in my hands as I poured out everything that had been happening. To her credit, she listened without interruption, her face a mask of professional concern. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, Charlie, what you're describing sounds like a combination of auditory and visual hallucinations, possibly brought on by stress, lack of sleep, or... She hesitated. Or what? I prompted. She sighed. Or it could be the early stages of a more serious condition. Schizophrenia, for example, often manifests in one's late 20s or early 30s. I felt the blood drained from my face. You think I'm schizophrenic? I'm not saying that, she said quickly. But I think we need to run some tests. Maybe get you started on some medication to help manage the symptoms. I nodded numbly, my mind reeling. Was that it? Was I just crazy? As if in answer, a whisper drifted through the room. She can't help you, Charlie. Only we can. I jerked my head up, looking wildly around the room. Did you hear that? Doctor, Reed's brow furrowed. Hear what? Charlie, the whisper. It said you can't help me. Her expression softened into something dangerously close to pity. I didn't hear anything, Charlie. But this is good. If we can identify the triggers for your hallucinations, we can work on managing them. I wanted to argue, to insist that this was real, but what if she was right? What if this was all in my head? We spent the next hour discussing treatment options. By the time I left her office, I had a prescription for antipsychotics and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the next week. That night, I crashed on a friend's couch, too scared to go back to my own apartment. The whispers followed me into my dreams, weaving dark promises and dire warnings. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. In the dim light of pre-dawn, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the wall above me, words were appearing as if carved by an invisible hand. We are not in your head. We are in your walls, in your floors, in your veins. We are everywhere, Charlie, and it's time for you to join us. As I watched, paralyzed with terror, the wall began to ripple and bulge. A hand, if you could call it that, pushed through, fingers too long and jointed in all the wrong places. I screamed, scrambling off the couch. My friend burst out of his bedroom, baseball bat in hand. "Charlie, what's wrong?" But when I turned back to the wall, it was smooth and unblemished. No writing, no impossible hand, nothing. I looked at my friend, then back at the wall. The whispers were growing louder, drowning out everything else. I have to go," I mumbled, pushing past him and out the door. I ran, with no destination in mind. Just away. Away from the whispers. Away from the things in the walls. Away from a reality I no longer understood. But as the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I realized a terrible truth. There was no running from this. Whatever was happening, hallucination or horrible reality, it was a part of me now. And sooner or later, I would have to face it, because the whispers were right about one thing. It was time. Story 11. The first time the elevator opened onto a floor that shouldn't exist, I thought I was hallucinating. I mean, I'd been pulling 16-hour days for weeks, living on coffee and vending machine snacks. It wasn't outside the realm of possibility that my sleep-deprived brain was playing tricks on me. But then it happened again, and again. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure about anything anymore. My name's Alex, and I work as a junior analyst at Pinnacle Investments, a soul-crushing corporate behemoth housed in a gleaming 50-story skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. It's the kind of place where dreams go to die and ambition curdles into bitter resentment. But hey, the dental plan is great. It all started on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just spilled coffee on my last clean shirt and was cursing my life choices as I stepped into the elevator. I jabbed the button for the 42nd floor, barely registering the other occupants as they filed in around me. The elevator began its ascent, the floors ticking by on the digital display above the door. 20, 30, 40. And then, instead of 41, the number flickered and changed to 73. I blinked, certain I'd misread. But no, there it was. 73. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. The scene before me was wrong. Instead of the sleek, modern offices I was expecting, I saw a dimly lit hallway straight out of the 1970s. Mustard yellow carpet, wood-paneled walls, the works. The air smelled musty, like old books and stale cigarette smoke. I turned to the woman next to me, words of confusion on my lips. But she walked out without a glance in my direction, her shoulder passing through me as if I wasn't even there. The doors closed before I could process what had happened, and the elevator continued its journey as if nothing unusual had occurred. When I finally reached my floor, I stumbled out, my mind reeling. "You okay, Alex?" My co-worker, Jenna, eyed me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that clung to me. "Just need more coffee, I guess." "Hey, this might sound weird, but how many floors does this building have?" Jenna frowned. 50. "Why? No reason," I muttered, hurrying to my desk. I tried to forget about it, to lose myself in spreadsheets and client reports. But the image of that impossible floor lingered, like a splinter in my mind I couldn't quite dig out. Over the next few weeks, it happened again, and again. Each time, the elevator would open onto a floor that couldn't possibly exist, each one different from the last. There was the floor that looked like an abandoned hospital, all peeling paint and rusty gurneys. The one that was a lush greenhouse, vines creeping up the walls and exotic flowers blooming in every corner. The floor that was just an endless, mirrored hallway, reflecting my bewildered face 1,000 times over. Each time, I'd see people, or what looked like people, going about their business as if everything was normal. But they never acknowledged me, never seemed to notice my presence at all. I started taking the stairs whenever possible, but in a 50-story building, that wasn't always feasible. And a sick, morbid curiosity began to grow. What were these places? Where did they come from? And why was I the only one who seemed to notice them? I became obsessed, spending my nights researching the building's history, looking for any clue that might explain what I was experiencing. I found nothing but dry facts about its construction and a list of tenants, past and present. My work started to suffer. I'd catch myself staring at the elevator doors, wondering what lay behind them. My boss noticed, calling me into his office one Friday afternoon. "Alex," he said, his voice a mix of concern and frustration. "What's going on with you lately? You're distracted. Your reports are sloppy. This isn't like you." I opened my mouth, wanting to spill everything. But how could I explain without sounding completely insane? I'm just going through some personal stuff," I mumbled. "I'll do better, I promise." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Take the weekend, clear your head. But I need you back on your A game Monday, got it?" I nodded, relief and guilt warring in my chest. As I left his office, a plan began to form. I'd come in over the weekend when the building was empty. I'd ride the elevator for hours if I had to, documenting every impossible flaw I encountered. I'd prove to myself, once and for all, that I wasn't losing my mind. Saturday morning found me standing in the empty lobby, heart pounding as I swiped my key card to activate the elevator. As the doors slid open, I took a deep breath and stepped inside. For the first hour, nothing happened. The elevator moved up and down as normal, opening onto familiar, deserted office floors. I was just about to give up when, on the 37th trip, the display flickered and changed to 86. The doors opened onto a vast library, shelves stretching as far as the eye could see. The smell of old paper and leather filled the air. I stepped out, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. For the first time, there was no one else around. I wandered down an aisle, running my fingers along the spines of books. The titles were in languages I didn't recognize, some in alphabets I'd never seen before. As I rounded a corner, I came face to face with myself, but not quite. This version of me was older, grayer, with a haunted look in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "It's not time yet." Before I could respond, he vanished, like smoke dissipating in the wind. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and ran for the elevator. The doors were closing as I reached them. I caught a glimpse of a figure inside, another version of myself, this one younger, full of the hope and ambition I'd long since lost. He gave me a sad smile as the doors shut. I jabbed at the call button, but nothing happened. The elevator was gone, panic rising in my throat. I turned back to the library. But where moments ago there had been endless shelves, now there was just a blank wall. The only feature was a door, old and weathered, with a sign that read "Exit" in faded red letters. With no other choice, I opened the door. Instead of a stairwell or another room, I found myself staring into a swirling vortex of colors and shapes. The pull was immediate and irresistible. I tried to step back, to close the door, but it was too late. I fell. Images flashed before my eyes. Moments from my life, paths not taken, futures that could have been. I saw myself as a child, full of dreams and possibilities. I saw the job offer I'd turned down, the relationship I'd let slip away. I saw versions of myself that were happier, more fulfilled, living lives I'd only ever dreamed of. And I saw this moment, repeated endlessly, Me, discovering the impossible flaws. Me, searching for answers. Me, falling through that door, again and again and again. I don't know how long I fell. Time seemed to have no meaning in that place. But eventually, I landed. Hard. I opened my eyes to find myself sprawled on the floor of the elevator. The doors dinged open, revealing the familiar sight of the 42nd floor. Jenna was there, concern etched on her face. "Alex, are you okay?" The security guy called up, said you've been riding the elevator for hours. I stood on shaky legs, my mind reeling. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? But as I stepped out of the elevator, I caught a glimpse of something in the polished doors. For just a moment, my reflection wasn't quite right. It smiled at me, a secret, knowing smile, before flickering back to normal. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just lost track of time, I guess." Jenna didn't look convinced, but she let it go. As we walked to our desks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. Not anymore. Now, every time I step into an elevator, I hold my breath. Part of me hopes to see those impossible floors again, to unravel the mystery once and for all. But another part, a deeper, more primal part, prays that the numbers stay normal, that the doors open onto familiar sights. Because I've seen behind the curtain of reality, and I'm not sure I can face what's lurking there. Not again. Not yet. But sometimes, late at night, when the office is empty and the city sleeps, I find myself drawn to the elevator. My finger hovers over the button, trembling with the weight of possibility. And I wonder, what floor will I end up on this time? Story 12. The first night I dreamed of the house, I woke up covered in sweat, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. I couldn't remember the details, just flashes of long corridors, doors that led nowhere, and a pervasive sense of being watched. I shrugged it off as nothing more than a stress-induced nightmare. If only I'd known then what I know now. My name is Ellie, and this is the story of how my dreams became a waking nightmare. It started innocently enough. I'd just moved to a new city for work, and the stress of the transition was taking its toll. The dreams came every night, always featuring the same sprawling Victorian mansion. At first, I was just an observer, watching from the outside as shadows moved behind curtained windows. But as the weeks went by, the dreams became more vivid, more immersive. I found myself inside the house, wandering its maze-like hallways. The interior was a mishmash of styles and eras. One room would be straight out of the 1800s, all velvet drapes and ornate furniture, while the next would be a sleek, modern space that wouldn't look out of place in an architecture magazine. I mentioned the recurring dreams to my co-worker Lisa over lunch one day. "Maybe it's your subconscious telling you to buy a house," she joked, stabbing at her salad. "Tired of that tiny apartment already?" I laughed it off, but the dreams nagged at me. They felt too real, too consistent to be random firings of my sleeping brain. Each night, I explored more of the house, discovering new rooms, new impossibilities. A library where the books whispered as I passed. A kitchen where the appliances seemed to breathe. A nursery filled with dolls that turned their heads to follow my movements. And always, that feeling of being watched. One night, about a month after the dreams began, something changed. I found myself in a part of the house I'd never seen before. A long gallery lined with mirrors. As I walked past them, I realized with a jolt that my reflection wasn't quite right. It was me, but older, younger. I couldn't quite tell. and it moved just a fraction of a second too slowly, as if struggling to keep up. I woke up gasping. The image of my not-quit reflection burned into my mind. That's when I noticed something on my nightstand that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. A small, ornate key, tarnished with age. My blood ran cold. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. With trembling hands, I picked up the key. It was solid, cool to the touch, undeniably real. I called in sick to work that day, my mind reeling. How had the key gotten there? Had I sleepwalked? Bought it somewhere and forgotten? But deep down, I knew. Somehow, impossibly, it had come from the house in my dreams. That night, I was almost afraid to go to sleep. But curiosity won out over fear, and I found myself back in the dream house. This time, though I was in control, I moved purposefully through the rooms, searching for a lock that might fit the key. I found it in the attic, a door so small I had to crouch to fit through. The key slid in smoothly, turning with a click that seemed to echo through the entire house. Beyond the door was a small room, empty save for a full-length mirror against the far wall. As I approached it, my reflection smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome home, Ellie," it said, its voice a twisted version of my own. "We've been waiting for you." I woke up screaming, sheets tangled around my legs. But the terror didn't end with consciousness. There, on my bedroom wall, where no mirror had been before, was my reflection. Still smiling that impossible smile, I ran, out of my apartment, down the stairs, into the pre-dawn streets. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour diner on the corner, collapsing into a booth and ordering coffee with shaking hands. As the adrenaline faded, doubt began to creep in. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen? Or was I losing my mind? I spent the day in a daze, jumping at every reflection, every shadow. When night fell, I checked into a cheap motel, too scared to go back to my apartment. But it didn't matter. As soon as I closed my eyes, I was back in the house. This time, it was waiting for me. My reflection, or the thing wearing my face, stood in the foyer. "You can't run from us, Ellie," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "We're a part of you now." I tried to wake up, to force myself out of the dream, but I was trapped. The house seemed to pulse around me, the walls breathing, the floors rippling like water. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The thing wearing my face laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "We are the dreams that never die, the possibilities that were never explored, the lives you could have lived." It gestured, and suddenly the room was filled with versions of me. Me as a child, eyes wide with wonder. Me as an old woman, face lined with experience. Me in a wedding dress. Me in a prison jumpsuit. Hundreds of Ellies, each one a path not taken. "You've been sleepwalking through life, Ellie," my reflection said. "It's time to wake up." I shook my head, backing away. "This isn't real. It's just a dream. I'll wake up and will you?" It interrupted. "Are you so sure? Look around you, Ellie. Really look." And as I did, I began to notice details I'd overlooked before. The family photos on the walls, all of me at different ages, in different lives. The books on the shelves, diaries and journals, all in my handwriting. This wasn't just any house. It was my house. Every room a different possibility. Every door a choice I'd made or could have made. "You're trapped between worlds," my reflection explained, its smile now tinged with sadness. "Not fully here, not fully there. You need to choose. Choose what? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Which life you want to live, which Ellie you want to be. As it spoke, doors appeared all around us. Behind each one, I could see glimpses of different lives. Me as a successful CEO, me as a struggling artist, me as a mother, me alone, but what about my real life? I protested. My job, my friends, my reflection laughed again, but this time it sounded almost pitying. Oh, Ellie, don't you see? This is your real life. All of it. You've just been too afraid to live it. I stood there, paralyzed by indecision. Each door called to me, promising fulfillment, adventure, love. But choosing one meant losing all the others. How could I possibly decide? You don't have much time, my reflection warned. The doors won't stay open forever. And if you don't choose? It let the sentence hang. But I understood the implication. I'd be trapped here, in this in-between place, forever. With a deep breath, I approached one of the doors. Behind it, I saw myself writing at a desk, surrounded by books. The life of an author, something I'd always dreamed of but never pursued. As my hand touched the doorknob, I hesitated, looking back at my reflection. Will I remember any of this? It smiled, a genuine smile this time. Does it matter? You'll be living it. I nodded, steeling myself. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I turned the knob and stepped through. I woke up at my desk, a half-written manuscript in front of me. For a moment, I felt disoriented. Memories of another life, of endless dreams, and a house that couldn't exist, fading like mist in the morning sun. But as I looked around my cozy writing nook, at the bookshelves lined with novels bearing my name, I felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. Still, sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I catch a glimpse of something in the mirror. A flicker of movement, a smile that's not quite mine. And I wonder about the other doors, the other lives I could have chosen. But then I turn back to my writing, to the worlds I create with words, and I know I made the right choice. This is where I belong. This is my real life. At least, I think it is. But in the back of my mind, a small doubt lingers. Am I truly awake? Or is this just another room in that endless, impossible house? I suppose, in the end, it doesn't really matter. Dream or reality, this is the life I've chosen, and I intend to live it to the fullest. Just don't ask me to explain why I keep that small, ornate key hidden in my desk drawer. Some doors, once opened, are best left closed. Story 13. The first time I saw the ghost in my rearview mirror, I nearly crashed my car. It was just after midnight, the roads slick with rain, when I caught a glimpse of pale face and hollow eyes in the back seat. I swerved, tires screeching, heart pounding. When I looked again, the back seat was empty. That should have been the end of it. A trick of the light, my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. But it was only the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my life, one ride at a time. My name's Jake, and I drive for rideshare. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Or it did, until the ghost started scaring away my passengers. At first, I tried to ignore it. The flickering shape in my peripheral vision, the soft whispers just on the edge of hearing. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, maybe the start of a mental breakdown. Anything but the truth. But as the days went by, it became harder to deny. The ghost was always there, a constant presence in my rearview mirror. Sometimes just a vague shape, sometimes terrifyingly solid, and it was getting stronger. It started small, A passenger would shiver suddenly, complaining about a cold spot. Another would keep glancing nervously at the back seat, though they couldn't quite say why. Then came the bad reviews. Creepy vibes, one read. Felt like someone was watching me the whole ride, said another. I was on the verge of losing my job when I finally decided to confront whatever was haunting my car. Late one night, after my last ride, I parked in an empty lot and took a deep breath. Okay, I said aloud, my voice shaky. I know you're there. What do you want? For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, slowly, a figure materialized in the back seat. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, God, her eyes were so sad. Help me, she whispered, her voice like rustling leaves. Please, help me. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. How can I help you? But she was already fading, dissolving like mist in sunlight. Find them, she said, her voice growing fainter. Find them before it's too late. And then she was gone, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and a growing sense of dread. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and frantic research. I scoured news archives, looking for any reports of young women who had gone missing in the area. There were too many, far too many. I was about to give up when I saw her face. It was an old article, dated 5 years ago. Local college students still missing. The headline read, her name was Emily Chun, and she had disappeared after getting into a rideshare car. My blood ran cold. Was this my ghost? And if so, what did she want me to find? I dug deeper, following every lead I could find. Emily had last been seen getting into a car with rideshare stickers. The driver had been questioned but never charged. The case had gone cold. As I researched, the ghost became more active. She would appear suddenly, causing me to swerve or brake hard. My rating plummeted. Passengers reported feeling watched, touched by invisible hands. One swore she saw a face pressed against the window, gone in a blink. I was on the verge of losing everything when I finally caught a break. An anonymous tip led police to reopen Emily's case. They found new evidence, traced it back to the original driver. The night they made the arrest, I was giving a ride to a young woman who looked unsettlingly like Emily. As we passed the police station, I saw them leading a man out in handcuffs. In my rearview mirror, Emily appeared, more solid than I'd ever seen her. Thank you, she said, smiling for the first time. And then, to my horror, she reached out and touched the passenger's shoulder. The woman screamed, jerking away from the invisible touch. Stop the car, she yelled. Let me out now. I pulled over, watching helplessly as she scrambled out, already on her phone to report me. In the back seat, Emily was crying, her form flickering like a bad TV signal. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to say goodbye. It's okay, I said, though it very much wasn't. Is it over now? Can you move on? She shook her head, her expression growing serious. No, there are others. So many others. They need help too. My heart sank. Others, you mean? Other ghosts? Emily nodded. Other victims. Other girls who never made it home. Will you help them? I wanted to say no. To tell her this was too much. That I couldn't risk my job, my sanity, my life for this. But the look in her eyes, I couldn't refuse. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'll help. Emily smiled, a sad, grateful expression. Thank you, Jake. They'll find you. Just be ready. And with that, she was gone. But I knew it wasn't the end. it was just the beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind of ghostly encounters and amateur detective work. My car became a beacon for lost souls, each with their own tragic story. Some had been murdered, others had died in accidents. All of them needed help to find peace. There was Maria, who led me to the shallow grave where her killer had buried her. Sarah, whose disappearance was solved when I followed her ghost to an abandoned well. And Lily, whose spirit guided me to evidence that proved her death wasn't the suicide everyone believed it to be. With each case solved, my reputation in the rideshare community grew worse. Passengers complained of cold spots, eerie whispers, and the constant feeling of being watched. My rating dropped to an abysmal 2.1 stars. I was one bad review away from being kicked off the platform entirely, but I couldn't stop. The ghosts kept coming, their pleading eyes and whispered requests driving me forward. I slept less, ate less, lived and breathed these cold cases. My friends stopped calling. My family worried I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was doing something important, something necessary. It all came to a head one rainy night in October. I picked up a passenger, a middle-aged man with a nervous demeanor. As soon as he got in the car, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. In the rearview mirror, I saw not one ghost, but 3. All young women, all staring at my passenger with a mixture of fear and rage. I knew then that this man was not a victim, but a predator. The pieces fell into place. The nervous behavior, the late-night ride to a remote location. He was hunting, and I had unwittingly become part of his plan. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I tried to figure out what to do. Call the police, but with what evidence? I was already on thin ice with my rideshare reputation. One false accusation, and I'd be done for good. The ghosts in the back seat grew more agitated, their forms flickering and distorting. The air in the car grew thick with static electricity. My passenger shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if he could sense the supernatural presence. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice tight with false concern. I forced a smile, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, just a little car trouble. Mind if we make a quick stop?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, as long as it doesn't take too long." I pulled into an empty parking lot, my mind racing. What was I doing? What could I possibly hope to accomplish? As I put the car in park, all hell broke loose. The ghosts surged forward, their cold energy filling the car. The man in the back seat screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly as one of the spirits passed through him. What happened next, I can't fully explain. The man's eyes rolled back in his head, and when he spoke again, it wasn't his voice. It was a chorus of voices, young and old, all speaking as one. "We see you," they said. "We know what you've done. And now, everyone else will too." The man's phone flew out of his pocket, screen lighting up as it dialed 911 on its own. When the dispatcher answered, the voices spoke again, confessing to crimes I hadn't even known about. Names, dates, locations, all spilling out in a torrent of supernatural revelation. By the time the police arrived, it was over. The ghosts were gone, leaving behind a shaking, sobbing man and a very confused rideshare driver with a story too wild to believe. Somehow, miraculously, I kept my job. The police report was vague enough to avoid mentioning anything supernatural, and the man's confession led to the closure of dozens of cold cases. I was hailed as a hero, though no one quite understood how I'd done it. These days, my rearview mirror stays blessedly empty. No more ghosts, no more whispers in the night. But sometimes, When I'm driving late and the roads are empty, I catch a glimpse of something in the back seat. A flicker of pale skin, a flash of sad eyes, and I wonder, are they really gone? Or are they just waiting for the next lost soul who needs my help? So, if you ever get into my car and feel a chill, or hear a whisper that doesn't quite make sense, don't be afraid. We're here to help. All of us. Just maybe don't look too closely at the rearview mirror. Some things are better left unseen. Story 14. The first time I noticed a face in my photos that didn't belong there, I thought it was a glitch. A trick of the light, maybe, or some weird artifact from my old camera. But as I flipped through my album, that face kept appearing, always in the background, always watching, and always, impossibly, getting closer. My name's Sarah, and I'm a photographer. Or at least, I was, before the faces in my photos started moving. It began innocently enough. I was sorting through some shots from a wedding I'd done last weekend. Nothing special, just your typical lovey-dovey couple surrounded by drunk relatives. But as I was cropping a group photo, I noticed something odd. In the back row, partially obscured by the maid of honor's elaborate hairdo, was a face I didn't recognize. Frowning, I zoomed in. The image was grainy, but I could make out the basics. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with deep-set eyes and a grim expression. Definitely not a wedding guest I'd missed. Weird, I muttered, making a mental note to check with the bride if she knew who he was. Probably just some random photo bomber. But then I saw him again, and again, in photos from different events, different locations. Always in the background, always staring directly at the camera. At me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a serial wedding crasher. Maybe I had a stalker with a really good disguise kit. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. The real kicker came about a week later. I was editing photos from a corporate event when I saw him again. This time, he wasn't in the background. He was standing right behind the CEO, his face inches from the man's shoulder, and he was smiling. I nearly fell out of my chair, my heart pounding. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank, or a sign that I was losing my mind. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called my best friend Mia. "Hey, Sarah, what's up?" Her cheerful voice was like a lifeline to sanity. "Mia, I need you to come over now. And bring your laptop." There must have been something in my voice, because she didn't argue. "I'll be there in 20. When Mia arrived, I was a mess. I'd pulled out every photo album I owned, spread prints across every surface. The man was in all of them, even in old family photos from when I was a kid. "Okay," Mia said slowly, taking in the chaos. "Want to tell me what's going on?" I tried to explain, pointing out the mysterious figure in photo after photo. To her credit, Mia listened without interrupting, her brow furrowing deeper with each image. "And you're sure this isn't some kind of double exposure thing?" she asked finally. I shook my head. "No way. Look at this one." I pulled up the corporate event photo on my computer. "Tell me you see him." Mia leaned in, squinting at the screen. "I mean, yeah, there's definitely a creepy old dude there. But Sarah, this has to be some kind of mistake. People don't just appear in photos like that." "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "I know it's impossible. But it's happening, Mia. And it's getting worse." I showed her the progression. How the figure had started in the far background, barely visible. How he'd gotten closer in each subsequent photo. How he was now interacting with the subjects, though they seemed oblivious to his presence. "Okay," Mia said, her voice carefully neutral. Let's think about this logically. When did you first notice him? I thought back. About a month ago, I guess. But once I saw him, I started noticing him in older photos too. Mia nodded, tapping away at her laptop. And has anything else weird been happening? Besides the photos, I mean. I opened my mouth to say no, but then hesitated. Now that she mentioned it, I've been having these dreams, I said slowly, about an old house. It's always the same one, but I've never seen it in real life. Mia's eyebrow shot up. Okay, that's relevant, maybe. What happens in these dreams? I shrugged, uncomfortable. Nothing much. I'm just walking through this house. It's huge, like a mansion, but empty. And I always feel like someone's watching me, but when I turn around, there's no one there. Mia was quiet for a moment, still typing. Then she turned her laptop around. Is this the house? My blood ran cold. There on the screen was the exact house from my dreams. Every detail was perfect, from the Victorian gingerbread trim to the slightly askew weather vane on the roof. How did you find that? I whispered. Mia's face was grim. I googled haunted house dreams, old man in photos. Sarah, you're not the only one this has happened to. For the next hour, we fell down an internet rabbit hole. Forums filled with people sharing similar stories. The mysterious figure in photos, the dreams of the old house, and always, the sense of being watched. Most of the stories ended abruptly. The posters just stopped updating, their accounts going dark. Those that did continue, well, I almost wished they hadn't. Tales of lost time, of waking up in strange places with no memory of how they got there, of loved ones insisting they'd done things they had no recollection of. This is insane, I said, pushing away from the computer. It has to be some kind of mass hysteria thing, right? Or an elaborate hoax. Mia didn't answer. She was staring at something over my shoulder, her face pale. Mia, I turned, following her gaze to the mirror hanging on my wall. For a split second, I saw him, the old man standing right behind me, his hand reaching for my shoulder. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. You saw him too? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mia nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah, I think we need to get you out of here. Now, we packed a bag in record time, grabbing my camera almost as an afterthought. As we hurried to Mia's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The streets were oddly empty, the usual city noise muffled and distant. We drove for hours, heading out of the city with no real destination in mind. Just away from my apartment, away from the photos, away from whatever was haunting me. As night fell, we found ourselves on a lonely stretch of road, trees looming on either side. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, and I found myself peering anxiously into the shadows, half expecting to see that grim, wrinkled face staring back at me. We should find a place to stop soon, Mia said, her voice tense. I'm getting tired, and she cut off abruptly as we rounded a bend. There, looming out of the darkness like something from a nightmare, was the house. My house. The one from my dreams. No, I whispered. No. This isn't possible. But there it was. Every detail exactly as I'd seen it night after night. The porch light was on, casting a sickly yellow glow over the overgrown front yard. Sarah, Mia said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Tell me that's not it, as I said, my voice hollow. It's the house from my dreams. As we stared, frozen in disbelief, the front door creaked open. A figure stepped out, tall, stooped, with those same deep-set eyes I'd seen in 100 photos. He raised a hand, beckoning us forward. "Drive," I said, panic rising in my throat. "Mia, drive." But the car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in front of that impossible house. The old man was walking towards us now, his movements jerky and unnatural. As he got closer, I realized with dawning horror that he wasn't just similar to the figure in my photos. He was made of them. His skin was a patchwork of familiar images. Faces, places, moments I'd captured over the years. "Sarah," he said, his voice a rasping whisper that somehow carried over the distance. "It's time to come home." I felt a tug, as if something was trying to pull me out of my body. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, but it wasn't me. It was a photo, flat and two-dimensional, being peeled away from reality. "Mia!" I screamed, reaching for her. But my hand passed right through her arm. I was fading, becoming less substantial with each passing second. The last thing I remember is the old man's face, right up against the car window. He was smiling that terrible smile, and as consciousness slipped away, I heard him whisper, "Smile for the camera. Sarah, you're part of the collection now. I don't know where I am now. Sometimes I think I'm still in that car, frozen in that moment of terror. Other times, I'm wandering the endless halls of that impossible house, always searching, never finding. And sometimes I'm in the photos, watching, waiting. So have you ever look at a picture and see a face that doesn't belong? Look away. Don't stare too long. Don't try to figure it out. Because we're always watching, always waiting for someone new to join our collection. And trust me, you don't want to be our next subject." Story 15. The first time I heard the playlist, I thought my phone had been hacked. The songs were unfamiliar, the titles gibberish, and the album art. Well, let's just say, it wasn't anything I'd have chosen. But as I listened, something strange happened. Memories started flooding back. Memories of a life I'd never lived. My name is Alex, and this is the story of how a mysterious playlist almost erased my existence. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was on the subway, heading home after a mind-numbing day at the office. As usual, I plugged in my earbuds, ready to lose myself in my carefully curated playlist of indie rock and lo-fi beats. But when I hit play, what came out was different. A haunting melody filled my ears, all swirling synths and echoing drums. The vocals were in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood every word. A story of loss, of a life left behind. I frowned, pulling out my phone to check what was playing. The screen showed a song title in strange, angular script, an album art that seemed to shift and change as I looked at it. "What the hell?" I muttered, earning a strange look from the elderly woman sitting across from me. I tried to switch to a different playlist, but every time I hit play, that same otherworldly music poured out. Frustrated, I yanked out my earbuds, only to realize the train had stopped. We were between stations, the tunnel outside pitch black, and in that darkness I saw something. A face pressed against the window. A face that was mine, but not quite. Older, sadder, with a scar running down one cheek. I blinked and it was gone. The train lurched back into motion, and by the time I got home, I'd almost convinced myself it was just my imagination running wild. Almost. That night, I dreamed. I was in a city I'd never seen before, all gleaming spires and impossible architecture. I was running, heart pounding, knowing I was late for something important. I woke up in a cold sweat, that haunting melody from the playlist still echoing in my head. And when I checked my phone, there was a new song, The City of Glass, the title read. The album art showed a skyline that matched my dream exactly. Over the next few days, the playlist grew. Each song brought with it a flood of memories, vivid and real, of a life I'd never lived. I saw myself as a soldier, fighting in wars that had never happened. As a scientist, making discoveries that defied the laws of physics. As a lover, in the arms of someone whose face I could never quite see clearly. And with each memory, each song, I felt myself changing. My reflection in the mirror seemed less solid somehow, as if I was fading away. Desperate for answers, I tried to research the songs, the artist, anything. But Google turned up nothing. It was as if this music didn't exist outside of my phone. My friends started to notice something was off. "Alex, are you okay?" My best friend Sarah asked over coffee. "You seem, I don't know, distant lately." I wanted to tell her everything. About the playlist, the memories, the feeling that I was somehow being erased. But how could I explain something I barely understood myself? "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just stressed about work, you know." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. As we left the cafe, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. For a moment, I saw the other me again, the one with the scar. He was mouthing something urgently. But before I could make it out, a bus passed by, and when it was gone, so was he. That night, I decided to listen to the entire playlist from start to finish. Maybe if I could understand the whole story, I could figure out what was happening to me. I settled into bed, earbuds in, and hit play. The music washed over me, each song flowing seamlessly into the next. And as I listened, I saw it all. I saw a world torn apart by war, by forces beyond human comprehension. I saw myself, that other me, fighting desperately to save what was left. I saw the device he built, a machine that could send consciousness across dimensions. And I saw what went wrong. In the final song, as discordant chords clashed and vocals rose to a desperate crescendo, I watched that other Alex activate the machine. But instead of saving his world, it shattered reality itself, splintering his consciousness, scattering it across countless dimensions, across countless versions of himself. As the last notes faded away, I sat up, gasping. My room looked wrong, translucent, almost as if I could see through the walls to other places, other times. And standing in the corner was him, the other Alex. "You understand now," he said, his voice a perfect match for my own. "We're the same person, just fragmented." I shook my head, trying to deny it, but I could feel it. The memories of his life, of all the lives I could have lived, merging with my own. "What's happening to me?" I asked, my voice shaking. He smiled sadly. "We're coming back together. All the scattered pieces, all the potential versions of us." The playlist was the key, the thread connecting all our realities. But I like my life," I protested. "I don't want to lose who I am." "You won't," he assured me. "You'll be more, all of us, combined. Every life we could have lived, every choice we could have made, we'll be whole again." As he spoke, I felt it happening. My sense of self expanding, encompassing lifetimes of experiences. I was a soldier, a scientist, a savior, a destroyer. I was everyone I could have been, all at once. The room around me began to dissolve, reality rippling like water. Through the cracks, I could see other worlds, other lives, all merging, all becoming one. "Wait," I gasped. reaching out to my other self. What happens now? What do we become? He took my hand, his form already starting to merge with mine. Something new, he said. Something that can fix what we broke. The world exploded into light and sound. I felt myself stretching, expanding, becoming something beyond human comprehension. Lifetimes of knowledge and experience flooded my mind, overwhelming in their intensity. And then, suddenly, it was over. I found myself standing in a place that was everywhere and nowhere. A nexus of realities, where all possibilities converged. And I understood my purpose. With my newfound power, I could see the cracks in reality, the damage done by that fateful experiment. And I knew how to fix it. It would take time, more time than any human could conceive of. But I was no longer bound by the limits of a single lifetime. I was all the Alexes that ever were or could be, working in perfect harmony to heal the multiverse. As I set to my task, I spared a thought for the life I'd left behind. For Sarah and all the others who had known that one small fragment of who I truly was. They would go on, living their lives, never knowing the truth of what had happened. But sometimes, when the work allows, I check in on them. A familiar song on the radio, a fleeting sense of déjà vu, a face glimpsed in a crowd that's gone in an instant. Little reminders of the Alex that was, and the vastness of what I've become. So if you ever come across a strange playlist, songs you've never heard but somehow know by heart, be careful, listen closely. You might just hear the echoes of lives you could have lived, of a cosmic drama playing out across realities. And who knows, maybe you'll be the next to be called home, to become part of something greater than you ever imagined. Just remember, once you start listening, you can never truly stop. The music of the multiverse is always playing, always calling. And sooner or later, we all have to face the song of our true selves. Story 16. The first night I caught a whiff of that scent, I thought nothing of it. A fleeting fragrance on the evening breeze. Something floral with an earthy undertone. Pleasant, but unremarkable. If only I'd known then how that innocent aroma would consume my life, piece by piece, memory by memory. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how a perfume nearly erased my existence. It was a crisp autumn evening when it all began. I was walking home from my job at the local library, leaves crunching underfoot, when that scent drifted past me. I paused, inhaling deeply. There was something familiar about it, something that tugged at the edges of my memory. I glanced around, trying to spot its source. A flower shop, maybe, or someone wearing an unusual perfume. But the street was empty, the shops all closed for the night. Shrugging it off, I continued home. But that night, my dreams were vivid and strange. I saw flashes of places I'd never been, faces I didn't recognize. And through it all, that scent lingered, growing stronger with each passing moment. I woke up feeling disoriented, my head pounding. As I stumbled to the bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and froze. For just a second, I didn't recognize my own reflection. The woman staring back at me seemed older, her hair a different color, her eyes holding a wisdom I didn't possess. I blinked, and my normal reflection returned. "Get it together, Claire," I muttered, splashing cold water on my face. "It's just lack of sleep, that's all." But as the days passed, things only got stranger. That scent kept appearing, always when I least expected it. In the grocery store, at work, even in my own apartment. And each time, it brought with it flashes of something. Memories that weren't mine, yet felt intimately familiar. I saw myself in a lab, mixing chemicals with practiced ease. I felt the weight of a wedding ring on my finger, though I'd never been married. I heard children's laughter, calling me mum, despite being childless. At first, I tried to ignore it. Told myself I was just stressed, maybe coming down with something. But when I started losing time, finding myself in places with no memory of how I got there, I knew I needed help. I made an appointment with Dr. Larson, a psychiatrist recommended by a co-worker. As I sat in his office, the leather chair creaking beneath me, I tried to explain what was happening without sounding completely insane. "And this scent," Dr. Larson said, his pen poised over a notepad. "Can you describe it more specifically?" I closed my eyes, trying to capture the elusive aroma in words. "It's complex, floral, but not overpowering. There's something earthy underneath, like petrichor, you know? The smell of rain on dry earth. And something else, something I can't quite place. It's familiar, but I don't know why." He nodded, scribbling something down. "And these visions, these memories that aren't yours, they only come when you smell this scent." "Yes," I said, then hesitated. "Well, mostly. Lately, they've been coming more frequently, even when I can't smell anything. And they're getting more intense, more real." Dr. Larson leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Claire, what you're describing sounds like a form of dissociative disorder, possibly triggered by this olfactory hallucination. I'd like to run some tests. Maybe try you on a low dose of," he cut off abruptly, his nostrils flaring. "Do you smell that?" My blood ran cold. The scent was here, in this office, stronger than ever, and as it washed over me, the world shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't Claire the librarian anymore. I was Dr. Claire Emerson, renowned neuroscientist and pioneer in the field of memory transference. The office around me transformed into my lab, sterile and white, filled with equipment I somehow knew how to use. "The experiment," I gasped, the words spilling out of me unbidden. "It worked, but something went wrong. The scent. It wasn't supposed to do this." Dr. Larson's voice seemed to come from far away. "Claire? Claire, can you hear me?" I blinked, and the vision faded. I was back in the psychiatrist's office, my heart racing. Dr. Larson was leaning towards me, concern etched on his face. "What just happened?" he asked. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I don't know. I was someone else. Or I was me, but a different me. Does that make any sense?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "Claire," he said slowly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that what you're experiencing isn't a psychological issue. At least, not entirely." "What do you mean?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I have a colleague, Dr. Ava Chun. She specializes in unusual cases. Cases that defy conventional explanation. I'd like to refer you to her, if that's all right." I nodded, desperation overriding any skepticism. At this point, I was willing to try anything. Dr. Chun's office was nothing like I expected. Instead of the sterile, clinical environment of Dr. Larson's practice, her space was warm and inviting. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with tomes on subjects ranging from quantum physics to ancient mysticism. The air was thick with the scent of incense, almost, but not quite, masking that now familiar aroma that haunted me. "Claire, Doctor." Chun greeted me, her smile warm but her eyes sharp and assessing. "Doctor, Larson filled me in on your case. Fascinating, truly. Please, tell me more about this scent." And so I did. I poured out everything. The visions, the lost time, the feeling that I was somehow being erased and replaced by another version of myself. Dr. Chun listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in a language I didn't recognize. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Claire, have you ever heard of the multiverse theory?" I frowned. "You mean, like, parallel universes?" "Sure, in sci-fi movies and stuff." She nodded. "It's more than just fiction. Many respected physicists believe in the existence of multiple realities, parallel universes where different versions of ourselves live out different possibilities." My mouth went dry. Are you saying these visions are real? That I'm seeing other versions of myself? "Not just seeing," Dr. Chun said, her voice grave. "I believe you're experiencing them. Somehow, you've tapped into a connection between these realities and this scent. It's acting as a trigger, a key to unlock these other lives." I slumped back in my chair, my mind reeling. "But how? Why me?" Dr. Chun leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Tell me, Claire, in these other lives, these other versions of you, what do they do? What's their profession?" I closed my eyes, trying to sort through the jumble of memories that weren't quite mine. "A scientist," I said slowly. "A neurologist, I think. Working on memory. On transferring memories between people." When I opened my eyes, Dr. Chun was nodding, as if I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. "I believe that in one of these other realities, you, or rather, another version of you, succeeded in creating a way to transfer memories. But something went wrong. Instead of transferring memories between people in one reality, it's bleeding across realities. And you, this version of you, is at the center of it all." As she spoke, that scent grew stronger. The office around me began to blur, reality seeming to ripple and shift. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to anchor myself in this world, this life. "What's happening to me?" I gasped. Dr. Chun's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Your realities are collapsing, merging, all the potential versions of Claire converging into one. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of memories. I was a librarian, a scientist, a mother, a soldier. I was everyone I could have been, all at once. Lifetimes of experience flooded my mind, overwhelming in their intensity. And through it all, that scent grew stronger, became more complex. I understood now. It wasn't just a smell. It was the essence of me, of all the me's that ever were or could be. When the world finally stabilized, I found myself back in Dr. Chun's office. But I wasn't the same Claire who had walked in. I was more. "Welcome back, Dr. Chun said softly. "Or should I say, welcome home." I looked at her with new eyes, eyes that held the knowledge of countless lifetimes. "You knew?" I said. "You've seen this before?" She nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I've helped others like you, fractured souls, split across realities, finding their way back to wholeness. What happens now?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "That's up to you," she said. "You have the knowledge, the experiences of all your potential selves. You can be anyone, do anything." As she spoke, I caught that scent again. But now, instead of triggering visions or memories, it filled me with a sense of peace, of completion. I stood, feeling the weight of infinite possibilities settling on my shoulders. "Thank you, Dr. Sean, for everything." As I left her office, stepping out into a world that seemed both familiar and utterly new, I realized the truth. The scent hadn't erased me. It had completed me, made me whole in a way I never knew was possible. Now, every breath brings with it the reminder of who I am, of all I can be. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, I catch a whiff of something strange and wonderful, well, who knows what new adventures it might bring. After all, in an infinite multiverse, anything is possible. And I, in all my myriad forms, am living proof of that. Story 17. The first time I caught that scent on the crowded street, I thought I was imagining things. It was unlike anything I'd ever smelled before. Complex blend of citrus, wood, and something undefinably exotic. But it was gone as quickly as it came, leaving me standing there on the sidewalk, nose in the air like a bloodhound. I'm Olivia, a perfumer by trade, and little did I know that this mysterious fragrance would lead me down a path I could never have imagined. It was a crisp autumn day in New York City. I was on my way to my little boutique perfume shop, weaving through the usual morning crowd of commuters and tourists. The air was filled with the typical city smells: exhaust fumes, coffee from street carts, hints of yesterday's garbage. And then, cutting through it all, came that scent. I stopped dead in my tracks, causing a businessman behind me to curse as he nearly collided with my back. But I didn't care. I was too busy trying to parse out the components of this incredible aroma. There was bergamot, definitely, and something woody cedar maybe. But underneath it all was a note I couldn't place. Something ancient and primal that made my heart race and my palms sweat. Just as quickly as it appeared, the scent vanished, leaving me disoriented and craving more. I spent the rest of the day distracted, trying to recreate that ephemeral fragrance in my mind. That night, I dreamed of vast, sun-baked deserts and crumbling temples. I saw myself walking through dim corridors lined with hieroglyphics, following that tantalizing scent. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat, and the phantom aroma still lingered in my nostrils. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed. I neglected my work, spending hours trying to recreate that scent in my lab. I mixed countless combinations of oils and essences, but nothing came close to capturing the complexity and allure of what I'd smelled on the street. My assistant, Jake, started to notice something was off. "Liv, you okay?" he asked one afternoon, eyeing the dark circles under my eyes. "You've been kinda intense lately." I forced a smile, aware of how I must look. Hair unwashed, clothes rumpled, surrounded by dozens of half-empty bottles. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just working on a new project." Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't push it. I was grateful for that. How could I explain that I was chasing a scent that might not even exist? As the days wore on, I started catching whiffs of that mysterious fragrance more frequently. In a crowded elevator, on a packed subway car, always just at the edge of perception. Each time, it brought with it flashes of those strange, visions-ancient cities. Forgotten rituals, faces that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. I began to lose sleep, spending nights poring over old books on perfumery and ancient aromatic practices. I ordered rare ingredients from far-flung corners of the world, maxing out my credit cards in the process. My shop suffered, customers turned away by my erratic hours and distracted demeanor. But I couldn't stop. The scent called to me, promising answers to questions I didn't even know I had. It was a month into my obsession when I had a breakthrough. I was experimenting with a particularly rare oil extracted from a flower that blooms once a century in the depths of the Amazon. When I accidentally knocked over a vial of my own blood. I'd pricked my finger earlier and hadn't bothered to bandage it. As the blood mixed with the oil, a familiar scent began to rise from the beaker. My heart raced. This was it. Not exact, but closer than anything I'd achieved so far. Without thinking, I added more of my blood to the mixture. The scent grew stronger, and with it came a rush of images, more vivid than ever before. I saw myself, not myself, but someone who looked like me standing before a great stone altar. She held a knife in one hand, a copper bowl in the other. The air was thick with incense and anticipation. I blinked, and I was back in my lab, gasping for breath. The mixture in the beaker had turned a deep, unnatural red, and the scent it emitted was intoxicating. Without hesitation, I dabbed some on my wrist. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The world around me seemed to ripple and distort. I heard chanting in a language I didn't understand but somehow knew. The walls of my lab melted away, replaced by towering stone columns and flickering torchlight. And there she was again, that other me. She turned, and her eyes met across centuries. I felt a jolt of recognition, of homecoming. Finally, she said, her voice echoing strangely, "You've found the way back." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, reality snapped back into place. I was on the floor of my lab, the broken beaker beside me, its contents seeping into the worn wood. From that moment on, the scent was everywhere. It clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I couldn't escape it, nor did I want to. Each inhalation brought new visions, new memories of a life I'd never lived, but somehow knew intimately. I saw myself as a high priestess in ancient Egypt, keeper of sacred scents and mistress of rituals that could bend reality itself. I felt the weight of millennia of knowledge, of power beyond mortal comprehension. But with these visions came a growing sense of unease. The other me, the priestess, she wanted something. Something only I could give her. Jake found me a week later, huddled in the corner of the lab, muttering to myself. The room was a disaster, broken glass everywhere, the air thick with competing fragrances. "Jesus, Liv," he gasped, rushing to my side. What the hell happened? I looked up at him, and for a moment, I didn't recognize him. In my mind's eye, he wore the garb of an acolyte, his face painted with ritual markings. "The scent," I mumbled. "It's alive, Jake. It wants to come through." He shook his head, confusion and concern warring on his face. "You're not making sense, Liv. Come on, let's get you out of here. You need help?" As he helped me to my feet, my hand brushed against his bare arm. The moment our skin made contact, that now familiar scent exploded around us. Jake's eyes widened, and I knew he could smell it too. "What? What is that?" he whispered, his pupils dilating. I smiled, a calm settling over me. "It's us, Jake. It's who we really are." The air shimmered, and suddenly we weren't in my lab anymore. We stood in that ancient temple, surrounded by robed figures. The other me, the priestess, stood before us, arms outstretched. "Welcome home," she said, her voice resonating with power. "It's time to reclaim your true selves." I felt it then, the pull of ancient magic, of knowledge and power beyond anything in our modern world. Part of me wanted to resist, to cling to the life I knew. But the scent was all around us now, irresistible and all-consuming. As Jake and I stepped forward, toward our other selves and the promise of forgotten power, I had one last coherent thought. Sometimes the most dangerous things in this world aren't what we can see or hear, but what we can smell. The invisible tendrils of scent that can reach into our most primal selves and awaken things long dormant. And then we were through, merging with our ancient counterparts, becoming more than we ever were in our mundane lives. The modern world fell away, replaced by one of magic and mystery, where scent held the key to unimaginable power. Now, as I stand before the great altar, mixing potions that can alter the very fabric of reality, I sometimes think back to my life as Olivia the perfumer. It seems like a dream, a pale shadow of what I am now. But I know, somewhere out there, in the bustling streets of New York or the winding alleys of Paris, someone else will catch that scent, and the cycle will begin anew. So the next time you smell something strange and wonderful on the breeze, something that calls to a part of you you didn't know existed, be careful. It might just be the key to unlocking a power you're not prepared to wield. After all, in the realm of sense, not everything that smells sweet is innocent. Some fragrances are gateways to worlds beyond our understanding, and once you cross that threshold, there's no coming back. Story 18. The first time I noticed my apartment shrinking, I thought I was losing my mind. It was subtle at first, a few inches here, a foot there. But as the days wore on, the walls began to close in with alarming speed, and I realized I was trapped in a nightmare that defied all logic. My name is Michael, and this is the story of how my home became my prison and nearly my tomb. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just gotten back from a week-long business trip, and I was looking forward to sprawling out on my own couch after days of cramped hotel rooms. As I unlocked my door and stepped inside, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The furniture was all in the right place. My dishes were still piled in the sink where I'd left them note to self. I really needed to clean those. And the view of the city skyline from my living room window was as breathtaking as ever. But something nagged at the back of my mind. It wasn't until I went to hang up my coat that I realized what it was. The closet by the door seemed smaller. Not dramatically so, but enough that I had to push my winter jackets aside to make room for my raincoat. "Huh?" I muttered, frowning. Did I buy more clothes and forget about it? I shrugged it off, chalking it up to jet lag and an overactive imagination. But as I settled in for the night, that feeling of wrongness persisted. The walls of my bedroom seemed to loom closer, the ceiling a bit lower than I remembered. Sleep was fitful that night, filled with dreams of being buried alive, of walls of earth pressing in on all sides. I woke up gasping for air, sweat-soaked sheets tangled around my legs. In the harsh light of morning, I felt foolish. Of course, my apartment hadn't shrunk. That was impossible. I went about my day, determined to shake off the weird vibes. But when I got home from work, there was no denying it. The change was subtle but undeniable. My coffee table was now flush against the couch, though I distinctly remembered being able to walk between them. The kitchen felt more cramped, forcing me to turn sideways to get past the island. Panic began to set in. I grabbed a tape measure from my toolbox and started taking measurements. The living room, which had been 15 feet wide yesterday, was now barely 14. The ceiling height had dropped by 3 inches. "This is insane," I said aloud, my voice shaky. "Apartments don't just shrink." I called my best friend, Alex, hoping he'd tell me I was imagining things. "Hey, Mike, what's up?" His cheerful voice was reassuring in its normalcy. "Alex, I need you to come over. Something weird is going on with my apartment." There was a pause. "Weird how? Just come over, okay?" You'll see. An hour later, Alex was standing in my living room, a confused expression on his face. "I don't get it, Mike. What am I supposed to be seeing?" I gestured wildly around the room. "Don't you see? It's smaller. Everything's closer together." Alex's brow furrowed with concern. "Man, it looks the same as it always has. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you picked up a bug on your trip." I wanted to scream in frustration. How could he not see it? But looking at his worried face, I forced a laugh. Yeah, maybe you're right. Probably just need a good night's sleep. After Alex left, I spent hours poring over the lease agreement, building plans, anything that might explain what was happening. But there were no answers to be found in the fine print. That night, I swore I could hear the walls creaking, groaning as they inched closer. I barely slept, jerking awake at every sound, convinced I'd open my eyes to find myself entombed in plaster and wood. The next morning, the changes were impossible to ignore. My king-size bed now touched both walls of the bedroom. The bathroom was so narrow, I had to shuffle sideways to reach the toilet. And the living room. God, the living room was half the size it had been just 2 days ago. I called in sick to work, unable to bear the thought of leaving my apartment. What if I came back and couldn't get in? What if it shrank away to nothing while I was gone? As the day wore on, I watched in horror as the walls visibly moved. It was slow, almost imperceptible, but if I stared long enough, I could see the paint bubbling, the plaster rippling as the room contracted. By nightfall, I was huddled in the center of what used to be my living room, now a space barely big enough for me to lie down. The furniture had been crushed, splintered by the relentless pressure of the closing walls. The windows were gone, swallowed up by the encroaching plaster. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. The walls must have been too thick now, blocking out any connection to the outside world. As the space grew tighter, panic clawed at my throat. I pounded on the walls, screaming for help until my voice gave out. But the apartment just kept shrinking, indifferent to my terror. I lost track of time in that ever-shrinking space. Hours or days could have passed. I had no way of knowing. My world had been reduced to a cube of drywall and terror. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when the walls were so close I could touch both sides with outstretched arms, I heard something. A voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from beyond the wall. Michael, are you in there? It was Alex. Beautiful, wonderful Alex, come to save me. Here, I croaked, my throat raw from screaming. I'm in here. I heard shuffling, then the sound of something heavy scraping against the wall. Hang on, buddy. We're gonna get you out. The next few minutes were a cacophony of crashing and banging, as Alex and whoever he'd brought with him tore through the wall. Finally, a crack of light appeared, growing wider until I could see Alex's worried face peering in. Jesus Christ, he breathed, taking in the impossibly small space I was crammed into. How? What happened? As they pulled me out, I blinked in the sudden brightness. We were in the hallway outside my apartment, but something was wrong. The door to my unit was exactly where it had always been, not shrunken or moved as I'd expected. I don't understand, I mumbled, looking back at the hole they'd smashed in the wall. Beyond it, I could see my apartment, normal-sized, untouched, exactly as it had been before this nightmare began. Alex put a hand on my shoulder, his voice gentle. Mike, you've been in there for 3 days. We could hear you yelling, but the door was locked from the inside. What happened? I opened my mouth to explain, but how could I? How could I describe the impossible horror of those shrinking walls, the creeping dread as my world literally closed in around me? As the paramedics checked me over and the police took statements, I caught a glimpse of myself in a hallway mirror. I looked haggard, wild-eyed, my clothes filthy and torn. But it was my expression that gave me pause. There was a look in my eyes, a haunted knowledge that I knew would never quite leave me. They told me later that it was some kind of psychotic break. Stress-induced hallucinations, they said. A mental breakdown that made me perceive my normal apartment as a shrinking death trap. I nodded and smiled and took the medication they prescribed. But late at night, when the walls of the hospital room seemed to ripple and shift, I wonder, was it all in my mind? Or did I glimpse some terrible truth about the nature of reality? A cosmic joke where even the sanctity of our own homes can turn against us. I don't know if I'll ever be able to live in an apartment again. The thought of 4 walls around me, of a ceiling overhead, sends me into a cold sweat. But I know one thing for certain. I'll never take space for granted again. So the next time you're in your home, and something feels off, a room that seems smaller than you remember, a ceiling that feels just a bit too low, don't ignore it. Measure it. Document it. And if you start to see the walls move, well, get out while you still can. Because once the shrinking starts, it doesn't stop until it's consumed everything, even you. Story 19. The first time I noticed my shadow move independently, I was sure it was a trick of the light. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, gone before I could focus on it. But as the days wore on, the incidents became more frequent, more deliberate. And I began to realize that the darkness I'd been carrying with me all my life had developed a mind of its own. My name is Evelyn, and this is the story of how my shadow tried to take over my life. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was walking home from my job at the local bookstore, the setting sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. As I passed under a streetlight, I caught a glimpse of my shadow on the pavement. For a split second, it seemed to be waving, though my arms were firmly at my sides. I blinked, shaking my head. "Get it together, Ev," I muttered to myself. "You're losing it." But that night, as I got ready for bed, I could have sworn I saw my shadow on the bathroom wall turn its head to watch me. I splashed cold water on my face, refusing to look in the mirror again until I left the room. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette, moving with a life of its own. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with shapeless, writhing darkness. The next morning, I woke to find my bedroom bathed in shadow, despite the bright sunlight streaming through the windows. As I sat up, the darkness seemed to recoil, slithering back to its rightful place behind me. "This isn't happening," I said aloud, my voice shaky. "Shadows don't move on their own. They just don't." But even as I said it, I saw my shadow on the wall stretch, cat-like, before settling back into my shape. At work that day, I was a nervous wreck. Every movement in the corner of my eye had me spinning around, heart racing. My coworker, Jess, noticed something was off. "You okay, Ev?" she asked, concern etching her features. "You seem really jumpy today." I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to my ears. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well last night. Weird dreams, you know?" Jess nodded sympathetically, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. As she walked away, I saw her shadow behave exactly as it should. A perfect, normal silhouette. I felt a pang of envy, followed quickly by a wave of fear. What was happening to me? As the week progressed, things only got worse. My shadow began to move more freely, more obviously. It would wave at passers-by when my hands were in my pockets, or reach for books on high shelves while I stood rooted to the spot. I started avoiding well-lit areas, sticking to the shade as much as possible. I called in sick to work, drew the curtains in my apartment, and huddled in the darkness. But even there, I wasn't safe. In the dim light of my laptop screen, I could see my shadow on the wall, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to confront it. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, a single lamp casting a harsh light across the room. What do you want? I demanded, feeling ridiculous for talking to my own shadow. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, my shadow began to move. It raised a hand, pointing at me. No, not at me. At my reflection in the mirror. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what it wanted. It didn't just want to move independently. It wanted to replace me. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away from the mirror. As I fell, I saw my shadow detach itself from the wall, looming over me with an impossible three-dimensionality. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my windows, and I was lying on the floor of my bedroom. My shadow was back where it belonged, seemingly innocent and innocuous. But I knew the truth now, and I knew I needed help. I called the only person I thought might believe me, my grandmother. She'd always been a bit eccentric with her talk of auras and energy fields. As a kid, I'd loved her stories of magic and the supernatural. As an adult, I'd written them off as fairy tales. Now, I was desperately hoping there was some truth to them. "Nana," I said when she picked up, my voice cracking. "Something's wrong with my shadow. It's alive." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she'd hung up. Then, "Oh, sweetheart, I was afraid this might happen." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean you knew about this?" "Not exactly," she said, her voice heavy with something like regret. "But there's a history in our family. A curse, some call it. Every few generations, someone's shadow wakes up." She went on to explain a family legend I'd never heard before. Centuries ago, an ancestor of ours had made a deal with a being of living darkness. In exchange for power and long life, she'd agreed to let the darkness inhabit her shadow. But the being had tricked her, slowly taking over her life until she was nothing but a puppet. Her body controlled by the shadow she'd invited in. Since then, Nana continued, the darkness has passed through our bloodline, lying dormant until it finds a suitable host, someone with a certain kind of energy. I felt sick. So what do I do? How do I stop it? "You have to confront it," she said. "Face it head on in a place of pure light where it has nowhere to hide. You have to prove that you're stronger than it is." "And if I'm not," I whispered. The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. Armed with my grandmother's advice and a mix of determination and terror, I prepared for my showdown. I bought every light I could find. Floodlights, UV lamps, even a miner's headlamp. I set them up in my living room, creating a space so bright it hurt to look at. As night fell, I stood in the center of that blinding space, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Okay," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "Let's do this." At first, nothing happened. My shadow, cast in multiple directions by the array of lights, remained stubbornly normal. But then, as if sensing my challenge, it began to move. It pulled away from me, coalescing into a three-dimensional shape that was almost, but not quite, human. It had my silhouette, but elongated, distorted, with fingers that tapered into claws and a head that was slightly too large for its body. "What do you want?" I demanded, proud that my voice only shook a little. The shadow opened what passed for its mouth, and a voice like rustling leaves filled the room. "To live," it said. "To be real. To be you." "Well, you can't have me," I said, squaring my shoulders. "This is my life, my body. You're just a parasite feeding off my family for generations, and it ends now." The shadow laughed, a sound like breaking glass that set my teeth on edge. "You have no idea of the power I possess," it hissed. "I've worn the skins of your ancestors for centuries. What makes you think you're any different?" As it spoke, tendrils of darkness began to creep across the floor, extinguishing the lights one by one. The room grew dimmer, shadows lengthening and twisting in impossible ways. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced it down. I thought of my grandmother, of the strength that must have run through generations of my family to keep this darkness at bay. I thought of all the things I loved about my life, my job at the bookstore, my friends, the simple pleasure of feeling the sun on my face. "No," I said, and this time my voice was firm. "You don't get to win. Not this time." I reached down deep inside myself, to a place I didn't even know existed, and I pushed. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like flexing a muscle I'd never used before, channeling a kind of energy I'd never known I possessed. Light burst from my skin, not from the lamps around me, but from within. It was blinding, searing, filling every corner of the room. The shadow creature shrieked, a sound of rage and pain that made my ears ring. And then, suddenly, it was over. The light faded, leaving me standing alone in my living room, surrounded by burnt-out bulbs and the faint smell of ozone. My shadow was back where it belonged, a simple silhouette on the floor. But now I could feel the difference. It was just a shadow again, nothing more. In the days that followed, I kept waiting for something to happen, for my shadow to rebel again, or for some other supernatural terror to take its place. But everything remained stubbornly, wonderfully normal. I called my grandmother to tell her what had happened. She listened in silence, and when I finished, I could hear the smile in her voice. "You did it, sweetheart," she said. "You broke the curse." I'm not sure I believe in curses, not really, even after everything that happened. But I do know that there are things in this world that defy explanation, dangers lurking in the most unexpected places. So the next time you see your shadow move in a way it shouldn't, or feel a presence in a darkened room, don't ignore it. Face it head on, because the darkness is real, but so is the light inside you. And in the end, that's what truly matters. Story 20. The first time I noticed my window showing events from the future, I thought I was hallucinating. It was a dreary Tuesday afternoon, and I was staring out at the rain-soaked street below my apartment, wishing for a break in the clouds. Suddenly, the scene shifted. The rain vanished, replaced by bright sunshine. People walked by in t-shirts and shorts, clearly enjoying a warm summer day. Then, just as quickly, it was raining again. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. "Get it together, Sam," I muttered to myself. "This is what happens when you don't get enough sleep." But sleep deprivation couldn't explain what happened next. My name is Sam, and this is the story of how my window became a portal to the future, and nearly cost me everything. At first, the visions were harmless enough. I'd catch glimpses of sunny days during rainstorms, or see leaves changing color weeks before autumn actually arrived. I convinced myself it was just an overactive imagination, fueled by too much caffeine and too little human interaction. Being a freelance graphic designer meant I spent a lot of time alone in my apartment, after all. But as the days wore on, the hallucinations became more frequent and more detailed. I started seeing specific events: a car accident at the intersection below, a marriage proposal in the park across the street, a fistfight outside the bar on the corner, and then, inevitably, these events would happen, exactly as I'd seen them, down to the smallest detail. I started keeping a log, jotting down everything I saw in a notebook. Date, time, description of the event, and without fail, each vision came true. At first, I was exhilarated. I mean, how cool is it to be able to see the future? I fantasized about all the ways I could use this power. Betting on sports, playing the stock market, maybe even preventing disasters. But then came the day I saw something I wish I could unsee. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I was sipping my coffee, idly watching the world go by through my magical window. The scene flickered, as it often did now, and I saw a young woman walking her dog. Nothing unusual there. But then a man stepped out from an alley, grabbed her, and dragged her struggling form out of view. I dropped my mug, barely noticing as hot coffee splashed across my bare feet. My heart raced as I scribbled down every detail I could remember. The woman's red hair, the man's dark hoodie, the small white dog. I had to stop this. But how? I couldn't exactly call the police and tell them I'd seen a future crime through my psychic window. They'd think I was crazy. Or worse, involved somehow. So I did the only thing I could think of. I waited by the window, watching for the woman with the red hair and the little white dog. Hours passed. My eyes burned from the strain of constant vigilance. But finally, there she was. I raced down the stairs and out onto the street, my heart pounding. As I approached her, I realized I had no idea what to say. "Hey, my window showed me you're about to be attacked. Didn't seem like it would go over well." Excuse me?" I called out, wincing at how creepy I must sound. "I know this is weird, but maybe don't walk down that way." I pointed toward the alley I'd seen in my vision. The woman clutched her dog's leash tighter, eyeing me suspiciously. "Why not?" I fumbled for an explanation. I saw some weird guys hanging out there earlier. Looked kind of sketchy. Maybe take the long way around, you know. Better safe than sorry." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, okay. Thanks for the heads up." I watched her walk away, taking a different route than the one in my vision. Relief washed over me. I'd done it. I'd changed the future. But my relief was short-lived, because as I turned to go back inside, I saw him. The man from my vision, standing across the street, staring directly at me. A chill ran down my spine as our eyes met. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around a corner. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, his cold stare boring into me. I tossed and turned, plagued by questions. Had I really changed the future? Or had I just postponed the inevitable? The next morning, I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, hair a mess, hands shaking as I poured my coffee. I approached the window with trepidation, both dreading and hoping for another vision. The scene outside flickered, and my breath caught in my throat. There was the redhead woman again, walking her dog. And there, emerging from the shadows, was the man in the dark hoodie. But this time, something was different. As he grabbed her, she turned, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. It wasn't fear in her eyes. It was recognition. She knew him. The vision faded, leaving me more confused than ever. What was going on? Had I misinterpreted what I'd seen before? I spent the next few days glued to my window, watching for the woman or the man, desperate for answers. But they didn't appear again. Not in visions, not in reality. My work suffered. I missed deadlines, ignored emails from clients. My whole world narrowed to that window and the mysteries it held. It was about a week later when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing in the hallway. Samuel Barker, one of them asked. At my nod, he continued, "We'd like to ask you a few questions about Amanda Reeves." My stomach dropped. "Who? The woman you spoke to last Sunday?" Red hair, walking a small, white dog. I swallowed hard. "Oh, her. Is she okay? The officers exchanged a glance. She's missing. Her husband reported her disappearance yesterday. Neighbors say they saw her talking to a man matching your description shortly before she vanished. Care to explain that? My mind raced. How could I possibly explain without sounding completely insane? 1. I just warned her about some sketchy guys I'd seen in the area. That's all. They didn't look convinced. Mind if we come in and take a look around? Panic clawed at my throat, but I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. As they entered, my eyes were drawn to the window, and there, reflected in the glass, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was me, but not me. My reflection wore different clothes, had a different expression, and behind me, stood the man in the dark hoodie, his hand on my shoulder, a sinister smile on his face. I blinked, and the image was gone, but the chill it left behind remained. The police searched my apartment, asked more questions. I answered as best I could, all the while fighting the urge to look at the window, terrified of what I might see. After they left, I collapsed onto my couch, my mind reeling. What had I gotten myself into? Had my attempts to change the future somehow made things worse? Days passed. I barely ate, barely slept. My window remained stubbornly normal, showing only the real, present world outside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something big. It was nearly 2 weeks after the police visit when I saw her again. The red-haired woman, Amanda, walking her dog like nothing had ever happened. I raced outside, desperate for answers. "Hey," I called out. "You're okay? What happened? Where were you?" She turned, confusion clear on her face. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Before I could respond, a man joined her. The same man I'd seen grabbing her in my vision. He put his arm around her protectively, eyeing me with suspicion. "Is this guy bothering you, honey?" he asked. Amanda shook her head. "No, he just seems confused." "Let's go." As they walked away, the man looked back at me, and in that moment, I saw it. A flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition. Triumph. I stumbled back to my apartment, my mind spinning. What was real? What was vision? Had I somehow caused this by interfering? As I approached my window, dreading what I might see, a thought occurred to me. What if the window wasn't showing the future at all? What if it was showing possibilities? Different versions of reality, branching off from each choice we make. And if that was true, what did it mean for me, for my reality? I stand here now, staring out at a world I'm no longer sure I understand. My window is just a window again, but the knowledge it gave me, the doubt it planted that remains. So, if you ever find yourself with a window to the future, or to other realities, be careful. The view might be incredible, but the cost, well, that might be more than you're willing to pay. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't what we can see coming. It's the ripple effects of our attempts to change it.